Chairman, distinguished guests, and esteemed participants. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the Business and Human Rights Seminar. My name is Akanksha, and I'm currently working with NHRC. I am honored to be your host for today's event. May I please request our Secretary General, Shri Bharat Lal, and Joint Secretary, Shri Devendra Kumar Nim, to proceed for the lamp lighting ceremony to inaugurate this event. May I also request our chair and panelists from the dais, Professor K. Vijay Raghavan, Ms. Gauri Kumar, Mr. Namit Agarwal, Mr. Shikhar Jain, Ms. Tulika Bansal, and Mr. Nilesh Kumar Sa to join our Secretary General and Joint Secretary for lighting the lamp. Thank you. Now, I would like to request Shri Devendra Kumar Nim, Joint Secretary, NHRC, to deliver his welcome address.
Honorable Chairperson and Honorable Members of National Human Rights Commissions who are guiding force behind conducting this seminar. Respected today's Chair, Professor K. Vijay Raghavan, former Principal Scientific Advisor to Government of India, Secretary General, National Human Rights Commission, Shri Bharat Lal ji, Madam Gauri Kumar, former Secretary, Coordination in Cabinet Secretary and Labour and Employment, Honorable Chairpersons and members of State Human Rights Commissions who are present here, His and Her Excellencies, ambassadors who are present here, all senior officers from Government of India, especially Ministry of Labour and Employment, Joint Secretary Mr. Nilesh Sa, officers from Ministry of Law and Justice, officers from Ministry of Corporate Affairs, esteemed representatives from business organizations, all esteemed PAFI members, partners and representatives from law firms, representatives from labor unions, representatives from civil society organization and non-governmental organization and transgender organization also. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon and warm welcome. I feel privileged to extend a warm welcome to all of you on this important occasion of international seminar on business and human rights. On behalf of NHRC, I extend special thanks to Professor Vijay Raghavan to accept our invitation to chair and moderate the first session on such a short notice. Thank you very much, sir. We are deeply grateful and extend welcome to Madam Gauri Kumar for accepting invitation and attending seminar as lead speaker in first technical session. Your experience and expertise in labor and employment and environment will greatly benefit the outcome of this seminar. I hope so. We extend our heartfelt and warm welcome to Sri Rajiv Kumar, who will be there, moderator and chair of the second session, who is former Vice Chairperson of Niti Aayog, for accepting our request to be chair and moderator of second session, and to respected Madam Aarti Ahuja, Secretary, Ministry of Labour and Employment, to be lead speaker. NHRC extends very warm welcome to all panelists and speakers of first and second technical sessions. Ms. Tulika Bansal from Danish Institute of Human Rights, Mr. Namit Agarwal from World Benchmarking Alliance, Mr. Shikhar Jain from CII, Mr. Pankaj Mendru, who was supposed to come up, but due to some miscommunication, he is not here. Ms. Vidya Tikku, Senior Vice President, Aditya Birla Group, and Dr. Gunveen Chadha, Assistant Secretary General, FICCI, and Ms. Nusrat Khan from UNDP for accepting our invitation to be speakers and sharing their expertise and experience relating to business and human rights with us. Further, I welcome officers from Lokpal and statutory bodies who are present here for joining the seminar. A very warm welcome to former members and officers from NHRC and officers from offices of NHRC's deemed members. On behalf of NHRC, I welcome all special rapporteurs, special monitors, and core group members of NHRC present here to attend the seminar. Further, I extend warm welcome to officials from Law Commission of India, Bar Council of India, NLUs, and law firms present here. A warm welcome to officers from Maharatna, Navratna, Miniratna PSUs, central universities, and other academic institutions, and our interns also who have joined virtually. I further extend a very warm welcome to experts on BHR from business organizations, civil society, and NGOs for joining the seminar on important subject business and human rights. Business and human rights, though UN guiding principles on business and human rights were adopted in 2011, is comparatively a new phenomena, but unintentional or intentional violation of human rights in business activities has been there since starting business and industries, and it is still prevalent not only in India but globally, and we should not shy away from accepting this fact. Also, without any hesitation, I accept that it is in more brutal form in unorganized sector. Some common areas where human rights violations may occur in the context of business and human rights are violation of labor rights, which can be in the form of child labor, employing underage workers or engaging suppliers that use child labor, forced labor, subjecting employees to forced or bonded labor conditions, unsafe working conditions, working hour violations, and human rights violations due to environment impact like pollution, deforestation, and water and land rights, such as displacement of people and affecting their access to clean water or land. Also, there are human rights violations which has been observed in supply chain mechanism, which is like human trafficking, involvement in supply chains linked to human trafficking or modern slavery, using mineral source from regions associated with armed conflict and human rights abuses, supplier exploitation, not ensuring fair and ethical treatment of suppliers in the value chain. Further, discrimination and inequality like discrimination against employees or customers based on factors such as race, gender, religion, caste, or disability. Unequal pay disparities based on gender or other discriminating factors. Accessibility, failing to make products, services, or facilities accessible to people with disabilities. And also, apart from that, community and land right, like displacing communities of their land for business purposes without adequate compensation or consent, and forcing communities to relocate due to business projects without ensuring their well-being. Further, corruption and bribery also. Engaging in corrupt practices such as bribery which can have negative social and economic consequences, so on and so forth. It is very important to note that business organizations have varying practices in their business activities, and many businesses are committed to respecting human rights and addressing human rights issues. However, vigilance, transparency, accountability, and above all, human rights due diligence become necessary to prevent and mitigate human rights violations within the business and industry, following respect, protect, and remedy framework under UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and also following regulations and guidelines under domestic laws. As NHRIs are mandated to protect and promote human rights, National Human Rights Commissions within the framework of Protection of Human Rights Act 1993 can and is ready to play a crucial role in advancing the principles of business and human rights in business and industry by promoting BHR principles, by policy development and advocacy, by facilitating access to remedy through guidance and compliance, by monitoring and reporting, through capacity building, through awareness and training programs, etc. That is why we are here with a shared purpose and a commitment to make a positive impact on the world of business and human rights. We will engage in discussions, share knowledge and experience, and find way forward to enable improvement in the field of business and human rights. Together, we can pave a new path that aligns business with human rights, and we are hopeful that the seminar has the potential to lead us in that direction. Once again, I extend a heartfelt welcome to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. I now request Shri Bharat Lal, Secretary General NHRC, to deliver his inaugural address.
Thank you, Akanksha. Good afternoon, everyone. Namaskar. Professor K. Vijay Raghavan, former Principal Scientific Advisor to Government of India, Gauri Kumar, former Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat, as well as Labor and Employment, and many other departments you work. My colleague, Mr. Nim, Joint Secretary, other dignitaries on dais, member of Human Rights Fraternity, chairpersons and member of State Human Rights Commissions, special rapporteurs, monitors, senior officers, friends and colleagues. Thank you very much. My colleague Mr. Nim has already spoken and given the background. What we intend to do, I will not deliver a long talk actually, very, very simple, that as we all know that under Protection of Human Rights Act, National Human Rights Commission is mandated to, if I shorten its mandate in just two things, A, protection and promotion of human rights, and B, awareness generation. What we are trying to do here today, that we have sought your time, your indulgence, and trying to sensitize you that there is a changing paradigm, there is changing landscape, and I think it makes a good business sense. It makes a very good business sense if we start harmonizing human right, your business strategy, and of course, climate change. I think it's a win-win-win situation for everybody, you know. And what we are expecting to this August gathering, because here everybody is knowledgeable person. What we are trying to do, that we trying to highlight that climate change, how it is going to impact how it is going to impact your businesses, how it is impacting basically people. And of course, when it impacts people, it impacts their human right. So idea is that let's come together. Excuse me. प्लीज टेल वो बाहर वहां पीछे बताइए कि वहां शोर ना करें, बाद में करेंगे, शोर नहीं करें, लंच ब्रेक में करेंगे, अभी बाद में करेंगे. So idea is that we have from 3 sectors: business, human right, and climate change. We all have come together, and let's see that in what way in the development of this country we can harmonize, we can address these issues. One example I'll give, that we all know that because of climate change, we are having long spell of droughts, and at times high intensity rainfall, probably much more, intense cyclones, causing a lot of disruption, loss of lives and livelihood. We are also seeing that new age economy, take semiconductor, take hydrogen fuel, a lot of water is going to be, required. Just imagine that, Honorable Prime Minister, the way India is progressing. Take India, Middle East, East Europe, this industrial corridor. Just imagine this economic corridor, the kind of opportunities is opening. It means we have to prepare for those situations. And in that preparation, dovetailing the issues, challenges related to climate change and human rights, I think is paramount. If you want to see that our business progress, there is no choice except that people who are working with us in the industry and or people who are living in and around our industrial estates, I think we have to think about them also. If we have to increase the per capita income, we have become 5th largest economy. Our endeavor is that we become 3rd largest economy in less than next 3-4 years. But simultaneously, if we have to improve per capita income to become a middle income country, it means how to do it. And one of the issues which everybody talks about, and this panel is much more knowledgeable, that this is what we call women-led development. I think this is one force. This we have not utilized fully. And what government is trying to do is that ensure that basic facilities are provided to every family, whether it's clean water or it's electricity or cooking gas or And then these women basically they are able to avail the opportunities by upskilling, better education, better health care, and joining workforce. And in this fashion, we can double the family income. So my request would be that we have 2 sessions basically. How to advance human rights. If we improve the quality of life of our workers, well, productivity can be increased, and it will increase. If we address climate issues our surrounding, it is going to have a positive impact on our businesses and business operations. So today what we have kept that 2 sessions and people from all sectors who have dealt with the issues, who are knowledgeable, we want to discuss, debate, and Human Rights Commission would like to contribute in whatever way to take this forward. So 2 sessions we have been kept. One is basically the first session is about harmonizing climate change, human rights, and business, and other is advancing human rights in businesses. So I'll stop here, and once again I welcome you all and thank you for sparing time and joining this session. And now I hand over the floor to Professor Vijay Raghavan, the first chair of the first session. I don't think he needs any introduction. You all of you know, and his work, his contribution, whether in biological science or the science administration and various mission, I think it's exemplary. So thank you, sir, for being here. Ma'am, thank you very much for being here, and my friends. So stage yours, sir. Thanks, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shri Bharat Lal, my distinguished colleagues on the dais, and all of you in the audience, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here today on this session on business and human rights, harmonizing climate change, human rights, and business. Now, this is an unusual topic because typically the world over, when you have meetings on such areas, you have people who are talking about climate change and where the problems are and what needs to be done. We have people talking about human rights and people talking about business, and it's not very common to have all of them in the same room. So I would congratulate the National Human Rights Commission to address this, because at the core of all our discussions are us as people whose importance in the planet I shall allude to, but unless humans are able to take their role in the planet well, we are going to be in a difficult situation. Now, I have as co-speakers Ms. Gauri Kumar, Ms. Tulika Bansal, Mr. Namit Agarwal, and Ms. Nusrat Khan over here. And we will hear from them, and I will just give you a brief introduction before we start with the other panelists. And I hope we'll have time for some discussions after that. Yeah, okay. So let's first look at the issue of climate. And why is climate of such great importance today? What are the causes of human-induced climate change? How did the current situation come about? Why are we in this situation? The way forward? And then how does one link this to human rights and business? And I shall be very brief. Now, human-induced climate change is not something new. It has been taking place ever since humans came about on this planet. And the reason that happens is, at a very modest level to start with, humans change the environment rapidly, and they change it by farming, by hunting, by domestication, by fishing, and all of this has links into the state of the planet. But for many centuries, this was not transformative in terms of the state of the whole planet, bringing it to a precipice. That transformation started taking place at the start of the Industrial Revolution, about 200-ish years ago, when the tools of large-scale change were developed by humans. For example, the engine, the steam engine, the ability to extract minerals and ores from the environment and use them, the ability to extract fuel, and importantly, in terms of our conversation today, the ability to develop and use a workforce of humans to make products and service markets. This combination at one level was exciting. At a second level, it was very important. It lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and gave them a longer life and a healthier life. At a third level, though, it started changing the planet in a manner which was and is irreversible. And those consequences were seen. It also had an impact in the way the world developed. Those who had all these resources developed at a very fast pace, exploiting natural resources, people, and markets in a manner which was unprecedented in human history. The result of this was a great asymmetry. And this asymmetry resulted in, again, an acceleration on all the parameters of climate change, greenhouse gas emission, creating a hole in the ozone layer, rising sea levels, melting ice, and so on and so forth. Now, that pace of development, of course, we have seen what happened, and the question is, what does one do now? One important factor to keep in mind about that pace in development is that required the existence of the other. If certain societies have to develop at a phenomenal pace and have a high standard of living and have a high quality of life, that was done at the expense of the environment and of other people. In other words, you were paying for a low-cost, high-quality life by putting forward the actual cost to the future. And this was a very big challenge. Now the world has changed dramatically. Peoples all over the world are rising. They have their rights. They want development. The world wants sustainable development. And you cannot exploit other economies, other people, for you to have a high standard of living. What does one do in terms of the way going forward? So if you want to now have lower greenhouse gases, if you don't want to use fossil fuels, how do you have development? So that is one aspect of the dilemma. But there are other aspects of this challenge, which is the side about what will certainly happen given that we are already at a tipping point. We are going to have consequences of climate change in health, in agriculture, in human migration, in rising sea levels, and the consequences on our cities and other towns and villages. How does one deal with this? Through adaptation and mitigation. Now, I'd like to end by saying that till recently, these were considered easily solvable problems by the market and changing economies. Whenever humanity has been in a crisis in the past, the assumption is that human innovation and intelligence will come out with a solution. That need not necessarily hold now anymore, given the tipping point we have. We have technologies, we have solutions. The stumbling block is not technology and solutions alone. Those are important, but the stumbling block is how our societies can work with governments and industry to look towards the future in a sustainable manner. That requires dramatic change in the way business functions.
Whenever humanity has been in a crisis in the past, the assumption is that human innovation and intelligence will come out with a solution.
I think that's a recording of my... So the challenge is, how does one go ahead in a manner where the technologies available are transferred for this common good in a manner for sustainable development. Now, my last sentence is the following. If you look up a speech by the former Vice President of Nigeria on what Africa's energy ambitions are, he points out something very interesting. He said, the West sees the development of Africa and its people as something which will give them sufficient food, electricity, and water. But the ambitions of an African girl child, for example, is to be a leader in the world of the future. You want to be an astronaut or an engineer or go to the financial market. That means much, much greater energy requirements. So it is not that you can be in a situation where the West can have all of those and ambitions of our people across the spectrum, across all continents, are not catered to. So the challenge for business is, how do you have what are currently high energy economies at lower energy use, at frugal cost, yes, do not curtail ambitions as well as sufficiency for people. So thank you very much. I will now hand over to my colleague, Ms. Gauri Kumar, and ask her for her comments.
Thank you so much for that background, which is an all-encompassing background, Professor Vijay Raghavan, Secretary General Mr. Bharat Lal, my fellow panelists, eminent delegates, and participants. We are one earth, one family, and we share one future. We meet at a defining moment in history where the decisions we make now will determine the future of our people and our planet. It is with the philosophy of living in harmony with our surrounding ecosystem that we commit to concrete actions to address global challenges. Sounds familiar, I'm sure? That's the declaration made by the leaders of the G20, which met in New Delhi on 9th and 10th September this year under the theme Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. And a harmonized action plan through partnerships was made possible for the planet, people, peace, and prosperity between countries with at times conflicting interest different challenges and backgrounds. I mention this because it is now universally acknowledged that cooperation and collaboration is essential in determining the course the world takes by collectively working towards shared goals. Businesses can be no exception, of course. For a long time, public interest concerns have been perceived to be primarily, if not singularly, in the domain of the government, be it climate change or human rights or similar challenges. Far-sighted and enlightened businesses, however, increasingly seek convergence with government in mutual long-term self-interest, where the pursuit of profit aligns with the protection of human rights and the preservation of our planet. Cross-domain interoperability enables synergy and for each participant to be more effective and successful within their respective domains. We therefore look forward to greater engagement of and ownership by businesses to address such challenges in collaboration with government, the point which Professor Raghavan you were making. The United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights refer to the responsibility of businesses to respect and uphold human rights in their operations, supply chains, and interactions with stakeholders. This approach promotes, we hope, responsible and responsive corporate citizens and accountability for human rights violations. Harmonizing climate change, human rights, and business is an imperative endeavor in our rapidly evolving world, and I'm grateful to NHRC for requesting us to address a difficult contradiction and reconcile the contradiction. Climate changes propose a profound threat to human rights, impacting vulnerable communities and ecosystems all the more. Meanwhile, businesses, as significant contributors to climate change, must recognize their role and responsibility in safeguarding human rights while pursuing their economic interests. Businesses can contribute significantly to climate change through controlling their carbon emissions, resource consumption, and environmental degradation by adopting sustainable practices and investing in clean technologies. This dual role necessitates a careful balance between business interests and human rights, and that's a balance that we seek to achieve. Businesses must integrate human rights and environmental considerations into their corporate social responsibility strategies. Climate change is having a significant impact on businesses, society, and individuals. It is increasingly recognized that a shift towards a low carbon economy is needed, as highlighted by Professor Raghavan. The building and construction sector, and I'll pick one sector as an example, the building and construction sector plays a very central role in this shift. The sector, together with construction, accounts for 36% of global energy use and 39% of energy-related carbon dioxide emissions annually. The major contributors to these emissions are the materials used, as well as the heating, cooling, and lighting of buildings and infrastructure. If we come to India, India's construction sector is the second largest employment generator. And as of 2023, 71 million of the workforce is estimated to be employed in the construction sector. But not surprisingly, only 81% of this workforce, only 19% of this workforce is skilled, and 81% is unskilled. It is seen, it's very well recognized that construction workers undergo various problems, such as casual nature of employment, ignorance and illiteracy, wage discrimination, irregular work, absence of social security, uncertain working hours, unsafe working environment, occupational diseases, injuries, inadequate implementation of labor laws, and since a lot of state human rights commissions are also here, inadequate implementation of labor laws recently came up in very stark, it hit us very starkly in the worker lift accident where several casualties, several fatalities were there. If we look at another level, the Himalayan region is one of the world's most sensitive hotspots to global climate change, with impacts manifesting at a particularly rapid rate at this moment. A situation that is predicted to intensify further in the coming years with dire and far-reaching impacts on food, water, and energy security, as well as biodiversity and species loss. Professor Vijay Raghavan was mentioning about those who took the lead in the early 20th century and those who could not and who are now trying to cope. And I think what climate change is a great equalizer. Climate change hits everybody almost the same. Whether we talk of floods, whether we talk of typhoons, whether we talk, I think it is hitting everybody, and that's why the time has come for all of us to unite together, and it hits the businesses equally hard. Now, with the change from snow to rain, issues like landslides and floods get worsened. Intensified rainfall triggers cascading debris flow, amplifying these events and causing devastation across the Himalayan region. With increasing pace of infrastructure development, roads and commercial development, the mountain is mostly cut sharply, not in terrace, but vertical form, which leads to many landslides, as the expert would have us believe. One hardly finds a geologist being part of the exercise, and that's a very strong comment, because you need to know the strata to be able to cut it effectively and not to cause landslides. These construction activities are neither sustainable nor resilient, and we have got to ensure that minimum damage is caused to the prevailing and very delicate ecosystems. The evidence is there for all of us to see. During our travel across the region, where we were working on a collaborative governance project of spring rejuvenation with Mr. Bharat Lal in his previous avatar, in partnership with the state government of Himachal Pradesh, we observed the crying need for traditional naulas, as the springs are very reverentially called in these areas. And when we went around and talked to a few people, they said we rever it like a temple, because we want it hygienic, we want to maintain. So the local people know the importance and the significance of the naulas or the springs. But the contrast was very interesting. The drinking water, all the requirement of water in most of the hill areas, hilly states, is done through lifting water from rivulets in the valley, believe it or not. And the consequences, grave consequences that you have for energy consumption and ecological damage. India has the world's highest social cost of carbon. India may lose anywhere around 3 to 10% of its GDP annually by 2100, and its poverty rate may rise by 3.5% in 2040 due to climate change, one report forecasts. We could doubt those numbers, but certainly the numbers would be around that. Let us look at a few statistics for workers. I happen to be the Secretary Labour and Employment, so I'm perturbed by the numbers. Look at contract numbers. In 2011, only 28.3% of factories employed contract workers. In 1920, the number swelled to 38.4%, more than 10% rise, with more than 5 million contract workers in the organized sector itself. Of the 198,628 organized factories surveyed, 98.4% of them employed contract workers in 1920, significantly higher than 71% in the previous year. Let's look at another classification of workers, which is the unorganized workers. As per the Economic Survey 21-22, total number of people working in the unorganized sector is around 43.99 crores during 2019, constituting about 93% of the total workforce in the country. Out of these workers in the unorganized sector, about 15 crores are employed in manufacturing and service, about 4.4 crore in construction work, and remaining in agricultural sector. Another interesting statistics. The share of factories paying workers with social security benefits like Provident Fund and bonus has gone down in the decade between 2011 to 20, and in 1920, only 67% factories paid provident fund, and only 55% factories paid bonus, down from 73% and 64% respectively in 2010 and 11. The workforce now primarily consists of contract-based informal workforce, but it will be low in training and skilling. It will be hugely flexible, and it will be a precarious workforce, as was seen during the recent pandemic. At the same time, contractual employment aids faster job creation, and companies often use contractual employees during peaks for global competitiveness. Universal account numbers under the Employees Provident Fund organizations were introduced for the first time in October of 2014 when the Honorable Prime Minister inaugurated the Shramev Jayate Karyakram. It provided access to the subscribers to their PF accounts for the first time. Till that time, they didn't know whether the amounts were credited or not. It provided portability across employers, paving the way for the contract and construction workers also to be registered. Till that time, they couldn't be registered. I was then the Secretary in the Ministry of Labour and Employment, and our fond hope was to see the 4.5 crore EPFO subscribers getting quadrupled in the next 5 years. While the numbers have not expanded to optimal levels, it is very satisfying to note that they have grown from 4.5 crore to 11.8 crore EPF members and their families getting benefits under the social security schemes administered by the EPFO. This would not have been possible but for the cooperation of businesses. This gives us the hope that businesses will respond to positive signals from the government, and together we can look forward to responsible businesses responsive to the current challenges, proactively collaborating with the government to create a harmonious environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gauri Kumar. We now have Ms. Tulika Bansal from the Danish Institute of Human Rights.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, co-panelists. My name is Tulika Bansal, and I work for the Danish Institute for Human Rights, which is also a national human rights commission. So I'm very honored to be here alongside my sister human rights commissions, the state human rights commissions, and other esteemed delegates and guests. I'm speaking here based on experience working on business and human rights for the past 12 years with the Danish Institute for Human Rights, and our institute has for more than 20 years been working on the intersection of the private sector and human rights, working directly with companies, with national human rights institutions, with governments, with civil society, and other actors. So let me start sharing a bit about the context that we are currently in when it comes to climate change and how this links to human rights and business. So please, the next slide. So as other panelists have already mentioned, the Earth is facing a triple planetary crisis. We are facing climate disruption, nature and biodiversity loss, pollution and waste. And this triple crisis is threatening everybody. It's threatening everybody's well-being and survival of millions and millions of people around the world, and particularly those that are most vulnerable and marginalized. And this is something that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has stressed over and over again in his different speeches and addresses. We cannot ignore this crisis anymore. We also know that climate change directly and indirectly interferes with the enjoyment of different human rights, including the right to life, the right to housing, water, sanitation, food, health, development, security of person, and an adequate standard of living. And it also exacerbates inequalities to those that are affected, especially those that are vulnerable, for example, children, indigenous peoples, and persons with disabilities. Next slide, please. So to address this climate crisis, we need to take action, and we need to move to a net zero society. And what does this exactly mean? So we need to move away from fossil fuels towards renewable and cleaner forms of energy. For India, this could mean to move towards solar and wind parks and moving away from coal mining and other fossil fuels. And India is already making a huge progress in terms of solar and wind projects, and India's energy matrix is already very much renewable. But how this transition towards renewable energy is done is really crucial. This transition needs to be just. And what does this mean, a just transition? This means that it has to be fair and inclusive. The ILO has given a definition of the just transition as greening the economy in a way that is fair and inclusive as possible to everyone concerned, creating decent work opportunities and leaving no one behind. In addition to creating decent work opportunities, we should not forget that the move to renewable energy sources and technologies such as solar, wind, hydro needs to be equitable for all people. However, numerous studies and reports have shown that the shift to renewable energy, while happening rapidly, is not respecting all people and the planet. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give some examples of human rights impacts of renewable energy projects across the globe, from the Latin American region, Africa, and Asia, but we also see these issues in Europe. So for example, in Norway, you have indigenous communities that are impacted by wind projects. In the Netherlands, we see issues related to the installation of solar panels and workers' rights. So to name a few, the first one is land confiscation and forced relocations of communities, impacting many different human rights, including impacts on livelihoods, food, and water. Other impacts relate to the impacts on indigenous and tribal communities that have a close relationship to the land and to the biodiversity for cultural and spiritual reasons, but also their livelihoods. Examples of such impacts exist in Mexico, but also among, for example, the Kenyan Maasai people and in different areas of India. Fishing communities may be impacted by offshore wind operations, and we see labor rights impacts along the value chains of renewable energy projects. For example, forced labor and child labor for the exploitation of raw materials. The closure of coal mines can have impacts on workers and communities that are dependent on coal. And biodiversity impacts and water usage-related conflicts are also common, particularly when it comes to the maintenance of solar panels. We see gender-related impacts in the renewable energy sector as well, in relation to land use, decision-making power, and gender issues in the supply chains. And last but not least, important to mention that we see an increasing number of threats, arbitrary arrests, and even killings of those that oppose renewable energy projects globally. We see that in the solar and wind sector and hydropower projects across the globe, from Honduras, Colombia, Kenya, to the Philippines and India. We see a shrinking civic space. Those that speak out face threats. So these are some of the issues that we found, and all these issues may increase over the years when we see a need to shift to the exploitation of more transition minerals to go towards a just transition. Next slide, please. Luckily, there are a few global developments that will hopefully help us to curb these impacts. So first of all, recently, last year, the UN General Assembly announced that everyone on the planet has a right to a healthy environment. The right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment was recognized by the UN General Assembly in 2022, and this resolution demonstrates a strong relation between the environment and human rights. And it also gives some responsibility to companies. If a company now causes environmental harm, it will inevitably have an impact on humans. So companies' obligations to respect human rights, including in the context of environmental harm, have now become more explicit. Another development is the increase of climate litigation cases worldwide. Amid the worsening impacts of the climate crisis, governments, corporations, and other greenhouse gas emitters are facing lawsuits and are being held accountable for causing climate and human rights harm. Around the world, litigation is becoming a powerful tool to driving climate action and justice, as the number of climate change court cases has more than doubled since 2017. And these climate litigations will push a further obligation to companies to do the right thing. And the third and last development that I wanted to share is the development around human rights and environmental due diligence legislation. Across the globe, we're seeing more and more countries and also the European Union enacting mandatory laws for companies to make sure that they respect human and environmental rights, and this will also increasingly focus on climate impacts. And businesses will be expected to acknowledge the link between human rights and the environment and show the steps they have taken to highlight these issues in their own companies and their supply chains. I want to conclude with recommendations for business and for national human rights institutions. So next slide, please. So some recommendations for business. The first one relates to leadership and policy commitments. Companies should have a leadership around human rights and commit themselves to respecting human rights and committing themselves to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights and other binding and non-binding instruments. And this should be through the senior management leadership recognizing this so that it trickles down throughout the entire company. The second point relates to practicing human rights and environmental due diligence. The UN guiding principles on business and human rights set out a number of steps that companies should take to respect human and environmental rights. This relates to, for example, identifying, addressing, mitigating, and remedying adverse impacts to people and to the environment. And this should include rights holders' engagement, so speaking and engaging with workers, with communities, with indigenous peoples, and also looking at impacts that happened in the past. And the last two things that I wanted to mention relate to grievance mechanisms. Companies need to have in place a grievance or complaint mechanism that ensures that those impacted can complain about human rights impacts and environmental impacts, including related to climate change. And lastly, when it comes to renewable energy, companies should recognize and work towards community ownerships in renewable energy projects so that the share of energy is more equitable. The last slide, please. And given that this event is organized by the National Human Rights Commission and that we have National Human Rights Commission officers and staff and state-level commissions in the room, I wanted to end up with some ideas and opportunities of what NHRIs and state-level human rights commissions can do when it comes to business and human rights impacts and in relation to climate change and renewable energy. So there are a number of opportunities. NHRIs can do awareness raising to the private sector on human rights and environmental due diligence. They can organize events for the private sector and trainings. We can also consider complaint handling of private sector related human rights impacts that is probably already happening, but how can this be strengthened? How can rights holders, those that are impacted, find their way to the NHRC better when it comes to private sector related impacts, including in relation to climate change? NHRC can also be involved in investigations and fact-finding of human rights impacts, for example, in relation to solar, wind, and hydropower projects in the country. Human rights commissions can also support climate litigation and be supportive in court cases that relate to human rights impacts in relation to the renewable energy sector. Lastly, human rights commissions can organize multi-stakeholder convenings, bringing together the private sector, government actors, and civil society, and create a safe space for all actors to discuss human rights issues. And lastly, commissions can play a role in advocating for legislative change, for example, for mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence legislation or ratification of relevant business and human rights treaties by India. To conclude, if the just transition is done right, it brings huge opportunities. It can be a true systems change in which all communities, workers, and countries are lifted up. Communities can lead and co-own renewable energy projects and can benefit from it. Increased energy access can lead to the realization of a number of other rights, such as the right to health and the right to education, to name a few. So let's strive for a just energy transition with respect for all, from workers to communities to indigenous people and women and others that could otherwise be negatively affected by action by the government, businesses, national human rights commissions, and the whole society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tulika Bansal. We now have Mr. Namit Agarwal on Social Transformation, lead World Benchmarking Alliance.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm truly honored to be here today and discuss the opportunities and challenges of harmonizing business, climate, and human rights. And I think for me, the first step of harmonization is mainstreaming. And it is good to see, like it has been discussed since morning, that coming together of different stakeholders discussing human rights is definitely an encouraging sign towards mainstreaming. I work at the World Benchmarking Alliance, where we try to assess the world's most influential 2,000 companies on how are they contributing to the accomplishment of sustainable development goals. Close to about 600 companies of these 2,000 are headquartered in the Asia Pacific region. And one of the benchmarks, the corporate human rights benchmark, is most relevant for this topic, and we have been publishing that for the last 7 years. So let me start by setting some context of where we are. And it is crucial to recognize that the world is changing rapidly, and with it, the dynamics of business and human rights. Corporations today are much more powerful in the social, in the economic front, and therefore their impact on human rights, on environment, on climate and biodiversity is very, very growing at a faster pace as well. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that this change is in the direction of greater human rights protection and to take urgent actions on climate crisis. I prefer to use climate crisis rather than change because that's what we are facing today. The UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which were adopted in 2011, provide a foundational framework for addressing some of these challenges. It has a 3-pillar framework emphasizing the need for states to protect human rights, for businesses to respect those rights, and for victims to have access to effective remedies. The UNGPs, as you would agree, is a framework to provide a lens on businesses and how we can hold businesses accountable, how we can work with businesses in the context of human rights. As we heard in the morning, human rights are inherent to the Indian and the Asian society. So it's not an alien concept for us. It's very much ingrained in what we have been living and preaching. However, mere principles are definitely not enough. And the time has come for us to mainstream some of these principles into the heart of our economic and social systems. Over the past decade, the intersection of business and human rights has evolved from a peripheral concern to more of a mainstream on the global stage. Tulika spoke about the legislation in the European Union on mandatory human rights due diligence. This has far-reaching impact beyond just the EU borders. It has a huge potential as well. Several Asian countries also have taken initial steps towards adopting business and human rights basis policies, guidelines, in some cases also mandatory requirements. India has the National Guidelines for Responsible Business Conduct and a reporting framework called BRSR. Thailand, Mongolia, Vietnam, Pakistan, and Japan have national action plans of business and human rights. Many other Asian countries, including India, is working on developing its own national action plan. Japan and South Korea are developing mandatory legislations on human rights due diligence. And I think that's also going to become more of a trend in coming years. So why is mainstreaming business and human rights essential? First and foremost, it's about justice. Human rights, as you all know, are universal and inalienable, and they apply to all individuals regardless of their location or occupation. No one should be left behind. This is the message of the Sustainable Development Goals as well. And no business should operate in a manner that undermines these fundamental rights. Mainstreaming business and human rights ensures that justice prevails. The second is about sustainability. A sustainable business is one that not only thrives economically, but also contributes positively to the well-being of societies and ecosystems. By mainstreaming human rights, we create a business environment where long-term success is built on ethical foundations, fostering stability and resilience. And it is very much similar to the Gandhian principle of trusteeship, which we have been practicing and following for several decades now. The third is about accountability, and I think in the morning as well, corporate accountability was mentioned a couple of times. There is a major power imbalance that exists between companies and between the people whose rights are impacted or who are at risk. And in the absence of strong accountability mechanisms that can ensure that companies respect and support human rights, the trust deficit between communities and businesses become wide. Let me highlight some trends that we have observed from our benchmark last year. One of the most interesting trends that we have been observing globally and also regionally over the past couple of years is companies are definitely improving. Business and human rights is not a new topic for most large and even mid-sized companies, even in Asian countries. But the pace at which companies are adopting business and human rights is very, very slow. And it is time for policy to accelerate and close the gaps of inaction. And we are already seeing some early signs of that happening. We measured that the share of companies who are scoring 0 on fundamental human rights indicators, such as making initial commitments on human rights, taking initial steps on human rights due diligence, on grievance mechanisms, has decreased over time. So that is definitely an encouraging sign and worth building on. The second trend that we observed was that elevating human rights responsibilities to the board and senior management level appears to hold key for better action on human rights due diligence. We found a positive correlation between assigning board level responsibilities and allocating day-to-day management resources and companies improving on human rights outcomes, which means that if there is a commitment from a company to adopt and implement business and human rights, they need to have a board level responsibility and resources to be able to do that. Without that, it will still remain a policy document somewhere on the company's website. The third trend that we observed was that companies need to translate their commitments to stakeholder engagement into meaningful action. And I think this is no surprise for many of us working in this space, where companies mostly talk about human rights due diligence, about taking action, but not necessarily engaging with people who are directly impacted or who are at risk. We found that 71% of the companies score 0 on their approach to engaging with stakeholders on a regular basis. On human rights due diligence, 23% engage with stakeholders while identifying their human rights risks and impact, but less than 5% involve them when it comes to assessing, deciding on appropriate action, evaluating action, or communication on negative impacts. 91% of the companies that we assessed did not disclose that they engage with stakeholders when it comes to designing, implementing, and improving their grievance mechanisms. The fourth trend that we observed was that companies are taking a hands-off approach when it comes to human rights in their supply chain. And I think it was also mentioned that in India and also in other countries in the Asia region, a lot of the economy is in the informal sector. A lot of the human rights exploitation happens in the supply chain, very often in the informal spaces. So it's very important that what happens in the supply chain is being monitored and companies are taking stringent action there. We have seen that while businesses have expectations from supplier, they will have a supplier code of conduct where they expect suppliers to follow certain principles, but a vast majority fail to follow through by supporting them or monitoring any progress. The fifth trend that we followed, which is linked to the climate crisis, is that there is a correlation between companies who are better off in implementing human rights. They are also better prepared and equipped for a just transition. We found a positive correlation, and this is in the automotive sector, where companies who have a positive human rights score and have an improved performance, they were also doing better on our assessment on the just transition, which means that companies that have fundamental human rights policies and processes aligning with the UN guiding principles are better equipped to identify, assess, and address risks and impacts on people associated with their climate measures as well. The national human rights institutions have a very important role in mainstreaming and building on the work that is already happening in the region on business and human rights. It has a very important and crucial role to hold governments and corporations accountable for their actions. Through monitoring, reporting, advocacy, NHRIs can shed light on human rights violations, seek redress for victims, and encourage positive changes in business practices. Let us consider the pivotal role that NHRIs can play in this process. NHRIs are uniquely positioned to bridge the gap between governments, business, and civil society. And I think a congregation of this nature is an example of how that is happening and can be further strengthened. They can serve as mediators, facilitating dialogue and cooperation among these stakeholders to address human rights challenges. They can also raise awareness within their respective countries about the importance of business and human rights, encouraging responsible corporate behavior. Furthermore, NHRIs can provide guidance and support to businesses in aligning their operations with human rights standards. This can include conducting human rights impact assessment or the due diligence that Tulika mentioned, offering training programs and disseminating best practices. By doing so, NHRIs help businesses navigate the complex landscape of human rights, ultimately reducing the risk of harm. NHRIs also have an important role on the third pillar of UNGPs, which is access to remedy, and which is a grave area of concern across the regions, not just in Asia, but also in other regions. They can ensure that victims of corporate human rights abuses have access to remedies, whether through mediation, negotiation, or whenever necessary legal action. NHRIs can also act as a safety net for those who might otherwise be left without recourse. And State Human Rights Commission in India's case have a very important role to play in that regard. In conclusion, the mainstreaming of business and human rights is not an option, it is an imperative for all of us. And we stand at a critical juncture in history where the choices that we are going to make today will shape the future of our societies, economies, and the well-being of generations to come. Therefore, it is incumbent upon us, as individuals, as organizations, and as representatives of national human rights institutions, to champion the cause of human rights in the business world as well. Together, we can build a world where business and human rights are not competing interests, but harmonious objectives, therefore creating a better future for all of us. Thank you.
Our final speaker in the panel is Shri Nilesh Kumar Saha, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, sir. Good afternoon, Honorable Principal Scientific Advisor, Professor K. Vijay Raghavan, Ms. Gauri Kumar, other dignitaries on the dais, respected colleagues from the Government of India, distinguished members of India's private sector and businesses, ladies and gentlemen.
Sorry to interrupt. I should add that after you, we have Mr. Jain also there. So please carry on.
I am honored to be addressing this August gathering on one of the most important issues facing the global community today, that is climate change. Having been recognized as one of the most serious threats facing humanity, addressing climate change is a global responsibility. The impact of climate variability and climate change on human and natural ecosystems poses serious challenges to the United Nations recognized global objectives of poverty eradication and sustainable development. Principle 7 of the Rio Declaration states that states shall cooperate in a spirit of global partnership to conserve, protect, and restore the health and integrity of the Earth's ecosystem. In view of the different contributions to global environmental degradation, states have common but differentiated responsibilities. Something in the end what Professor Raghavan mentioned about the different levels of development in different countries. This was incorporated in the multilateral climate change regime governed by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and its Paris Agreement, making the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities and equity as the cornerstones of climate discourse. Under the Paris Agreement, parties agreed to commit to certain obligatory climate actions based on their national circumstances, called the nationally determined contributions, while pursuing the global temperature goals to limit warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade and well below 2 degrees centigrade, in context of, again, sustainable development and poverty eradication. India ratified the Paris Agreement with a clear objective to combat climate change by following a low carbon path to progress and provide unencumbered and affordable access to cleaner sources of energy based on the fair and ambitious assessment of global commitment to combating climate change. India thus follows its climate change commitments under the UNFCCC process by making poverty alleviation and sustainable developments as its priorities. The Paris Agreement also acknowledges that climate change is a common concern of humankind and that parties should respect, promote, and consider their respective obligations on human rights when taking actions to address climate change. That's the only reference that we have to human rights in either the UNFCCC, that is the Convention document, or the Paris Agreement. Climate actions under the Paris Agreement. The actions under the Paris Agreement here are understood in terms of mitigation, adaptation, and provision of means of implementation and support. The best available science in the form of the findings and observations of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has highlighted in its latest report that prioritizing equity, climate justice, social justice, inclusion, and just transition processes can enable adaptation and ambitious mitigation actions and climate resilient development. Adaptation outcomes are enhanced by increased support to regions and people with highest vulnerability to climatic hazards. It will be pertinent to note that the climate change is a result of cumulative greenhouse gas emissions, which stay on in the atmosphere over not just decades but centuries. CO2, carbon dioxide, is supposed to last for around 200 years, and you could say some other estimates peg it to around 500 to 1,000 years being remaining in the atmosphere. This accumulation has exacerbated since 1850. That's the dawn of the industrial era that we had. So the problem already exists and is going to remain, not just for our generation, but intergenerationally. Adverse impacts of climate change are felt more by the present generation in the developing countries on account of their vulnerability, even though they have contributed minimally or nil to the problem. Urgent measures are needed to help adapt to the impacts of climate change. However, in the discourse, especially the global discourse, adaptation receives far lesser attention. India has been voicing concerns of the global south along with other like-minded developing countries, emphasizing the need for enhanced adaptation action and support for their vulnerable population. India's domestic climate change framework, that is being guided by the National Action Plan on Climate Change, has identified core vulnerable areas to further adaptation action, which are related to water, sustainable agriculture, sustaining Himalayan ecosystem, human health, and Green India. On all of these, we have missions under the National Action Plan on Climate Change, which are being steered by individual ministries. As per the recent IPCC report, regions and people with considerable development constraints have high vulnerability to climate hazards. Climate resilient development is advanced when actors work in equitable, just, and inclusive ways to reconcile divergent interests, values, and worldviews towards equitable and just outcomes. The IPCC report re-emphasizes India's consistently held position that development is our first defense against climate change. Article 1 of the 1986 Declaration on the Right to Development states that the right to development is an inalienable human right. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, also acknowledges that social protection, the right to development, and working towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals are key to eradicating poverty, reducing inequalities, and making sure we leave no one behind. India's development path is based on the overriding priority of economic and social development and poverty eradication, and its adherence to its civilizational legacy that places a high value on the environment and the maintenance of ecological balance. Our vision is to create a prosperous, sustainable, but not a wasteful society. Guided by the aspiration of making India progress on a sustainable pathway, India is taking a number of initiatives to deal with the issue of climate change and has made considerable progress. India has progressively continued decoupling its economic growth from its GHG emissions and had already achieved 24% reduction in emission intensity of its GDP between 2005 and 2016. It's a rough estimate that we would have almost reached our target of around 33 to 35% that was supposed to be achieved by 2030 by now. But the figures are still to be firmed up and it has to come out. And it has also already achieved its NDC target of 40% cumulative non-fossil fuel based electric installed capacity that was to be achieved by 2030, 9 years ahead of its committed time. It stands at around 44% today. India's commitment through its NDCs now stands enhanced to 45% reduction in emission intensity of its GDP between 2005 and 2030, and 50% cumulative non-fossil fuel based electric installed capacity by 2030. Either of the two targets are achievable only through active cooperation and commitments on part of the businesses that account for sizable energy consumption in the country. This is evident from the sector-wise percentage emissions, wherein energy or electricity generation accounts for around 75% of the GHG emissions. Out of this, consumption of electricity by commercial and industrial users is around half. To steer the economy on sustainable development path, several initiatives of the Government of India have encouraged participation and involvement of the private sector and businesses in the areas of GHG emission reduction, such as the implementation of the National Green Hydrogen Mission, the energy efficiency, such as the production-linked incentive scheme, the Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme, and also the launch of iDiksha portal, among many others, promotion of renewable energy through various schemes of the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, enhanced material efficiency, and waste management and recycling. A paradigm shift was also brought in when SEBI's business responsibility reporting, to which Mr. Namit has already referred to, was brought in, and subsequently it was changed to BRSR, that is a Business Responsibility and Sustainable Reporting Framework, which mandated top Indian businesses to report their performance on environmental, social, and governance aspects and demonstrate their commitment to responsible business practices that contribute to India's sustainable development. The essential indicators from the BRSR relate to resource usage, air emissions, waste management are required to be reported. These are required to be reported on a mandatory basis. The leadership indicators, however, which are non-mandatory, include energy consumption mix through renewable energy and non-renewable energy sources, water discharge, water withdrawal, consumption and discharge in areas of water stress, Scope 3 GHG emissions pertinent for the climate change, and impact on biodiversity. These are reported on voluntary basis, as I mentioned. Thus, it is upon the business leaders, because of the voluntary nature of actions directly related to climate change, it is upon the business leaders to pursue the goals of setting and attaining the climate targets while committing to their climate actions. At the global stage, India, in partnership with Sweden, launched Leadership Group on Industry Transition, which gathers countries and companies that are committed to achieve the Paris Agreement. India also, along with France, set up the International Solar Alliance, a collaborative platform for increased deployment of solar energy technologies as a means for bringing in energy access, ensuring energy security, and driving energy transition in its member countries. Honorable Prime Minister also launched the Mission Life to drive climate-friendly behaviors among individuals, communities, and organizations. That should include the businesses. The concepts of reduce, reuse, and recycle are woven into our life. Circular economy has been an integral part of our culture and lifestyle. Energy efficiency is one of the most important strategies in reducing carbon footprint. It has been a part of India's NAPCC since its inception, and now is delving into the approaches of circular economy and resource efficiency to achieve this objective. Honorable Prime Minister, in his address to the nation on this occasion of 75th Independence Day on 15th August 2021 highlighted India's action on Mission Circular Economy. Extended producer responsibility regulations on market-based EPR principle have been notified for 4 categories of waste: plastic packaging, waste, battery waste, e-waste, and waste tire. To take forward resource efficiency and circular economy practices globally and making a lasting impact on environmental sustainability, an industry coalition, the Resource Efficiency and Circular Economy Industry Coalition, RECEIC, has been launched by India as the G20 president. As a collaborative platform, the RECEIC aims to facilitate knowledge sharing, best practice sharing, and sustainable practices among the participating industries. The coalition has 3 guiding principles: partnership for impact, technology cooperation, and finance for scale. Businesses can be part of the coalition to further their efforts towards environmental sustainability. The Government of India, while undertaking commitments through the NDCs submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, has endeavored to create appropriate environment for the businesses to contribute towards climate action as well as sustainable development. The contribution by the business towards a low carbon development contributes to create the first defense against climate change, while at the same time serving the Declaration on the Right to Development through its role in eradication of poverty and sustainable development. Sir, before I end, I would just like to share a small anecdote and probably a message through that. Yeah, a message through that. There was, maybe I could just share the message. That is that in all our business establishments, at least on the small and medium MSMEs, there is something written as Shubh Labh. Translated into English, I don't know whether it is the right translation, it is profit with purity. So maybe if we bring in this particular concept into our business dealings, it could really serve the purposes of tackling environmental degradation, climate change, and also addressing human rights issues. So ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a coordinated collective action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shah. Our last speaker, Mr. Shikhar Jain, Executive Director, CESD CII.
Thank you. First of all, let me thank to NHRC for this topic.
I've already heard the fellow panelists and also the introduction by the Secretary General NHRC. I think unique about this session is the dimension of climate change being discussed along with human rights and businesses. And I think all the fellow panelists have already covered the aspects of businesses. So there are 2 points that we are discussing over here when we heard the Joint Secretary MOEFCC, that when it comes to climate change, India, which was considered to be laggard for some time, but now we have paced up and we are almost in line with our NDCs. So I think there is a global felt that India has moved much beyond what was expected out of India from the global south perspective. And that's something great for us, that we are on track with our NDCs. So I think while we are discussing of this subject of climate change, its impacts on and connecting it to human rights and seeing how businesses can contribute, I think one particular thing is that when this debate of climate change happens across the world, this is a concern of 150 years. I think 1850 to 2000, that's where the complete era is. And India has not been the major contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions. But as Prime Minister said, we need to be the part of solutions. And in those solutions, when India started implementing it through its different mission, what Joint Secretary has mentioned, we are amongst the top 10 nations, I think, when it comes to the IPCC index, where the climate-related actions have been taken. And I think that have been already discussed. In renewables, India is third in the world after US and China. Of course, we are building up our capacity on renewables. So when it comes to the connect of businesses and looking human rights aspects into it, I think the major aspects over here is that India is itself going into the energy transition mode, which by default we use the word just transition, but I will see it from the business perspective. It is the energy transition and industry transition. These two transitions are going on, and in these transitions there are three sectors where we divide the complete industry. One is the sunrise sectors, which is the renewables we are talking of. This emerged as a big industry for India. Almost out of the 500 gigawatt targets that we have, 180 gigawatt has already been achieved, the installed capacity point of view. How much it comes to the grid and all, that is a matter of implementation that we have to look into. Second aspect, so we have to see from the human rights perspective, and I think that's where I thank NHRC is, that they have brought this topic on a very apt time, that you are trying to connect that while companies or businesses are working on the climate action, how the human rights aspects have also to be integrated into it. I think that's the main discussion point for us today in this and the session coming after this. So one is the sunrise sector, the renewables. We have to see the complete new workforce which is coming into this particular sector, which is solar, wind, biomass, many new forms of energies, biofuel, green hydrogen. We have to have a workforce which is quite talented. We have to reskill them, create new workforce, look this as an opportunity how we can grow. So that's the role of business, that how this sector expands, and that reduces our footprint both globally at the national level and also at the state level. Second point where there is a challenge from the human rights perspective and businesses is the companies which are going into the transition mode. There is a lot of transition also happening, means you have seen that India is soon becoming the EV hub, the electrical vehicle hub. So you already have the existing workforce which is working in the sector where the automotives are already there on various other fuels. Now you are going on a new fuel where you are seeing the business transition is going on. So you have to reskill those workforce. And that's where the dimension comes, that when we are doing those human rights due diligence within the organization or within the supply chain, we have to see that in this transition, these factors of labor, code of conduct are also taken care of. And I think that's the important point that businesses are looking into. Third important point where we have seen from the learning from the COVID part is that while industry is going either into transition, which is to the new product portfolio and all, or it is the sunrise sector we are going on, the health impacts, and I think the climate change related health impacts are one of the key things which directly gets integrated into the human right aspects, is that, and we have seen how the labor workforce has adjusted during the COVID times. And very important part over here, what Ms. Gauri Kumar touched upon was the issue related to when we say the adaptation part. And I think that's where we are facing a concern over here. We are seeing the change in the weather patterns that is taking place across the country, and we have seen somewhere droughts, somewhere floods which is coming. So the workforce which is working within the industry has also to adjust to these heat stress and all, because somewhere where the temperature is going very high, 48 to 50 degrees, I think that's where businesses have to take care, that how do we take care of the climate related health impacts that are going to take place, and that is where the adaptation part is. So on the crossroads of this complete debate of climate change, human rights and business, what we have to look is, one is the mitigational aspects, which is the energy efficiency, the transition parts we are going on, we have to see that human rights are covered over there. Other is the new sunrise sectors that we have spoken about. Third is the health impacts, I think from the adaptation point of view, which is very important. And I think because we have various commissioners from the state also, a very important part is one very important document which JSMOFCC has missed out, and I was thinking that what new I should speak on is that each of the state is having something called as a state action plan on climate change. That is called as SAP-CC. And that is a wonderful document that MOEF approves, and which I request all of you over here coming from various state level commissioners to go through that, because that covers the vulnerability aspects at the district level. So while the businesses are making their business strategies, they are making which areas, which district to grow, we have to see in correlation with the state action plan on climate change, where they have already predicted the 2030, what would be the climate variations taking place. And I think that is something that we have to integrate. And that's why I will just end over here, because coming between the lunch, I will thank NHRC that at least you have brought to the discussion the context of climate change to be seen from a lens of human rights and how businesses can integrate it while they are doing due diligence either within their own business or across the supply chain, and how we can work in a collaborative manner both at the state level and at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jain, and I thank all my fellow panelists. It would have been very nice if we had time for discussion. I'm sure we can try and do that over lunch since we're running very late. Thank you very much, and thanks to the NHRC, the Secretary General, and everyone else for a very valuable session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such an enlightening session, sir. May I now request Shri Bharat Lal, Secretary General, NHRC, to felicitate the panelists by presenting a memento. Our Chair, Professor K. Vijay Raghavan. Ms. Gauri Kumar. Mr. Shikhar Jain. Ms. Tulika Bansal. Mr. Nilesh Kumar Shah. And Mr. Namit Agarwal. Thank you so much. Now I would like to request all of you to proceed for lunch. We shall be commencing our next session at 3 p.m.
करा दिया हमने, चेंज हो गया बराबर से।
May I please request everyone to take their seats? We will be beginning with our session 2 soon. May I please request everyone to take their seats? We shall be beginning with our session 2. I request everyone to take their seats. We are beginning with our session 2. I request everyone to take your seats. And I request all of everybody who's sitting at the back, please come forward. I request everyone who's sitting at the back rows, please come forward. I request everyone to take your seats so that we can begin with the session quickly. People sitting at the back, please come forward and take the seats.
ये देखो ऑन हो जाएगा आप।
Let's move on to our second theme of today's event, Seminar on Business and Human Rights. The second theme is advancing human rights in business and industry. This theme emphasizes the importance of human rights in business and industries and also underscores the crucial need for corporations to embrace their ethical responsibilities and contribute positively to the well-being of the society. It is my pleasure to introduce and welcome our chair and moderator of this session, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, former chairperson, Niti Aayog. Mr. Kumar is former vice chairperson, Niti Aayog. He is governance expert with a record of expertise in economic reforms. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Kumar. I would also like to welcome the lead speaker for the session, Ms. Aarti Ahuja, Secretary, Ministry of Labour and Employment. Please give a warm welcome to Ms. Aarti Ahuja. I would now like to welcome the speakers for this session, Ms. Vidya Tiku, Senior Vice President, Aditya Birla Group. I would also like to welcome and invite Mr. Rajiv Jain, Honorable Member, National Human Rights Commission on the dais. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Rajiv Jain. I would now like to invite Mr. Gaurav Vats, Director, FICCI and Asian, East Asia, Oceania and North America. Now I would like to invite and welcome Ms. Nusrat Khan, BHR Specialist, UNDP India. I welcome the chair and all the panelists on the dais. And now I give over to the chair, Mr. Rajiv Kumar. Over to you, sir. Yes, sir. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Wonderful to be here, and I must congratulate the National Human Rights Commission for thinking of the innovative subject of business and human rights. The two normally are not thought of together, but I think it's high time to start thinking in those lines, and it's a real pleasure and honor to be here and chairing the session. And for that, I have to also thank my long-standing friend, Mr. Bharat Lal, for doing me the honors for this and welcoming all the eminent panelists who are here. I just wanted to have a few words before we start the session, and one that I've now observed as an economist, that the old motto, the old maxim that the only purpose of businesses is to maximize profits is not going to work any longer. I think that's old Adam Smithian sort of tenet, and I think that doesn't hold any longer. And my first encounter with this was when I was the chief economist of CII, and my president was somebody whom many of you know, called Yogi Deveshwar, who introduced at that time, and this is, I'm talking early 2000s, the idea of the triple bottom line, and said that every corporation has to now meet the triple bottom line, which is the social, environment, and the financial. And I think that's the beginning of this idea. And now this is now being, as it were, enshrined, as it were, in the concept of the ESG, the environment, social, and governance rules that all corporates are now expected to follow. So under the ESG rubric, under the ESG framework, every corporate, as I think his name is Tom Rifkin, the head of Blackstone, the largest private equity firm, I think he's put it very well. He's saying, and he follows it. is that you have to do well by doing good. You have to do well while doing good, and that's the corporate idea. And in this doing well, doing good, human rights must be at the top of somewhere high up on the agenda. Now, this is, of course, true for us because we are ILO signatories, we are signatories to the UN guidelines on human rights. We are a vibrant democracy, and therefore we've got to take everybody along, and especially because the Secretary, Labour and Employment is with me, I must sort of point out that we have to take along the informal sector, which constitutes 85% of our labour force today. And the violation of their human rights is quite rampant. So I think, the only thing that I do want to point out finally before I hand over to our eminent experts is that India is the only country in the world which has this challenge of growing exponentially and also reducing its carbon content, and at the same time also making sure that our diverse society becomes coherent and comes along with us. I think there's a triple challenge that we face for ourselves. And environment must be a part of human rights to afford everybody in this country a safe, livable environment where children can breathe the air that they are supposed to breathe, and people work in environment and climates where they get a safe environment to work in. So I think it's quite clear that the corporates have their responsibilities cut out for human rights, and I hope that in this session we'll be able to focus on that and then bring out some recommendations. This time not for the government but for the corporate sector. Normally all sessions end with recommendations to the government. So with those very few words, my great pleasure in requesting first Ms. Aarti Ahuja, the Secretary of Ministry of Labour and Employment, a 1990 batch IAS officer from the Orissa cadre. Ms. Ahuja.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for inviting me here to talk on this issue. And thank you to all the participants who are here today. I was telling sir that post-lunch we used to call the graveyard session. So I will try and keep you engaged while I talk. So we are talking about business and human rights. Let me start with human rights first. So we are all governed by what is the definition of human rights in our country. And what is that? Right to life, liberty, equality, and dignity. And I'll touch upon all of these in precisely 4 points that I'm going to make. But before that, when we are talking of business, sir, you mentioned economics. So I also have been a student of economics. And we started by learning that there are 4 factors of production. There is land, labor, capital, and enterprise. What we learned is that the only factor that had any agency or decision-making power was enterprise. Rest were all factors of production without agency. So cut to today. Today, that scenario does not exist. It has changed. Economics may still be behind in thinking, still continuing to think like that. However, the world has changed, and today it is no longer a fact that labor does not have agency. What is happening today? What are the mega trends across the globe? We all are aware, but let me just quickly bring all of us on the same page and up to date. A number of reports have come out. In fact, last year ILO and OECD brought out a report for G7 where they enumerated 3 mega trends. They called them the 3 Ds: digitization and decarbonization and the demographic change. But apart from that, what are the other things that we are seeing? We are seeing a hyper-connectedness. Even today, I think even as we speak, somebody may even be doing a live cast or doing a tweet, etc. So hyper-connectedness. There has been an economic power shift, undeniably. I think G20 has shown that. India is now the 5th largest economy in the world. Asia is the biggest market in the world. So things are not the way they were. The economic and political power shift is underway. It is happening. China Plus is being talked about in different countries. On the work front, we are seeing earlier, if you joined an automobile factory, that was the dream job and you remained there all your life. Today, it's not like that. There are non-linear careers. There are jobs that are being taken away like this due to AI and technology, and jobs that are being created like this due to AI and technology. We all know what those jobs are. And what is that leading to? It's leading to a continuous skill gap. It's not like I train people to do Java or C++ today and it will remain relevant tomorrow. Maybe not. Maybe tomorrow what we'll need more is more plumbers. Right? So the requirement of jobs, of skilling, is exponentially changing. In fact, I used to be part of the Secretary of Chemical and Petrochemical Department earlier. And this was a constant conversation we used to have. People used to say, I need very specific skill sets. So what the chemical petrochemical industry has done now, they have started opening their own universities and skilling centers so that they take people on board, train them, and then employ them. So this is the kind of, and chemical petrochemical incidentally is the fastest growing sector of the economy. So how do you even keep pace with that? It's not just about digitization. So jobs are coming, jobs are going, and it's a flux. And post-COVID, what has happened is that we all know that we all worked from home. Remote work has become a reality. The whole gig and platform economy, it grew a lot during COVID times, all over the world, not just in India. And of course, one thing that really came up is the care economy. The care economy, again, grew exponentially during COVID and continues to grow because of the demographic shift in the Western countries, especially, where the aging populations and demand that care economy. And that is not something that is very amenable to digitization, right? So those kind of things are happening. In fact, one of the surveys post-COVID found that after COVID, nearly 25% people changed their jobs because they wanted to be closer home, they wanted more work-life balance, they wanted to be close to their families, there were mental health issues. So the way, COVID in fact has also impacted the way of work very significantly. Even in the dictionary, I think new terminologies have come up, like quiet quitting. You just stop working, you don't quit totally, but you don't put in as much effort. So all these kind of things are happening in the world of work. So the old definition of the factors of production or business only being a factory, all that is changing very rapidly before our very eyes. Now, why is human rights important for business? One is, of course, the ethical question that Sir mentioned, that we need to do well while doing good. Yes, all of us need to do that. But I would say now it has become imperative. As Labour Secretary, I'm part of many discussions where we are discussing free trade agreements. We are discussing global and regional trade pacts. We are discussing in the governing body of ILO a number of issues. And what is common is that now increasingly in all the FTAs, in all the regional agreements, labor rights have become a part of that. The new terms being used, and which are defined already by ILO, is decent work and global value chains. What does that mean? If you are supplying something to some country, and that country says that there is no decent work as defined by ILO in that value chain, we are not even talking of supply chains, which is why even the unorganized sector that Sir mentioned comes into picture. So when you are talking in each and every agreement, when you're talking about decent work in global value chains, you're talking of labor rights, and you're making it an integral part of trade, then it becomes imperative for business to keep that in mind and to ensure that the human rights of labor are protected. What is there by way of human rights in all these agreements? So if we are growing as an economy, I mentioned about chemical, petrochemical, their exports are, rate of growth is somewhere in the region of some 20-25%, that is the rate of growth. So if let's say down the line there is an MSME that is just discharging acid dyes without treating, even though it's a big company that is supplying somewhere, that will get captured, right? So the environmental part of it and the labor part of it. So what it means is that fair labor practices, no child labor, no forced labor, having social dialogue with partners, even issues of mental health. We have been talking of occupational safety and health, right? Which is something that we, all want, that there should be a focus on that. As part of my ministry, we also have the Employee State Insurance Corporation, which runs hospitals. So recently we started looking at the public health aspect and mapping diseases with the kind of industries that are there. And just yesterday I was having that presentation. For example, in areas where garment, textile industries are located, we are seeing a higher incidence of eye disease. So I asked them, why is that? Because they're supposed to wear protective eyewear. They are not wearing that, because of which their eyes are getting permanently damaged. So this is, as I said, it is an ethical question, all right. It is also a regulatory question, but it is also imperative that we do it, regulation or ethics at that level, but it is in business interest to do it. We need to make sure that those occupational safety and health standards are met. In fact, why should there be lead poisoning and dialysis near industries where heavy metal is processed? This should not happen. So it is a clear infringement of human rights of people who work in those industries, which is why we need to be very, very clear that this is an imperative. So I'll stop here and just very briefly mention that in the labor codes that have been enacted by Parliament, 29 laws were brought together. They were modified, many provisions were repealed, and now we have 4 labor codes, which are very progressive in nature. And in a way, they balance very well the requirements of industry. The industry needs to grow, as also the safeguards for people who work. So when we are talking business, it is not just, as I mentioned, a factory or a manufacturing. It is businesses across board, and whether in the organized sector or in the unorganized sector. So I think I will stop here and once again reiterate that human rights and business were intertwined, but now they are increasingly becoming even more intertwined at the global level. And what happens at the micro level is going to determine how we perform at the macro level. So thank you once again, and thanks for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Ahuja, and it was a very succinct and comprehensive treatment of the subject. And I'm so glad that you brought out the fact of decent work, which is now becoming a part of all FTAs. I really also must compliment you for bringing out the fact of lead poisoning. I've just got onto this very much, and lo and behold, friends, you may not know that 275 million children in this country, 27.5 crore children in this country are exposed to dangerous levels of lead poisoning, which actually damages and retards brain development for life. Now, if that is not a human rights situation, what else is? And it is businesses who are now adulterating turmeric with lead oxide. It is businesses who are now putting lead in their paints and recycling the lead acid batteries in a manner that the acid gas sort of goes into the earth and then affects the children. So there you are, you see the lead, the human rights, the child's rights, for not being exposed to lead is directly controlled by or affected by what the business practices are. So I think those are the things that we need to, take into account, and businesses have to rise to the occasion, because government regulation will simply not be enough. It have to be a self-regulation that we'll have to take forward. Thank you very much for that introduction, for that sort of your presentation. Would you like to take some questions now? Or?
Sure, sir,
Because she has to leave early. So if there are any questions to Ms. Ahuja at this point of time, then most welcome. Well, maybe people...
You don't have to.
People will think about it. You're here for another half an hour with us. So let's say something like that, yeah? Yeah. Our next speaker is Mr. Rajiv Jain, who is a member of the, just a little later, of the Human Rights Commission now. He was earlier the chief of the IB in his earlier role, and therefore an IPS officer, I presume. Mr. Jain.
Mr. Chairman, sir, my fellow panelists and colleagues. I wasn't planning to sit in the session because I'm supposed to be present in the AGM going on upstairs of the APF. But the subject has been close to my heart, and we at NHRC have been working behind the scenes on this subject for some time now. Madam, you mentioned about occupational health and diseases. The NHRC was at the forefront about 10 years back when it pointed out geographical areas of concentration where silicosis was there. And we were able to nudge several state governments like Rajasthan, etc., into framing a policy on silicosis. So initially the governments tried to pin it down onto the businesses, but then it was very difficult because an employee may have shifted from one business to another. It would be difficult to pin down the responsibility of each business. Ultimately, the government realized that it has a role to play, since the disease ultimately happened because the government was unable to impose the safe working conditions, and the businesses were able to take advantage of that. And hence, the society has to bear the cost. So the governments framed policies of financially helping out people affected by silicosis. We've also we've written to the Institute of Occupational Health, Madam, to identify those geographical areas and the kind of diseases which are theirs, so that we can persuade the governments and the businesses to look more positively at this in order to prevent such happenings. About 6 months back, we held a conference in which ophthalmologists were invited, and they went into issues of how some kind of eye diseases and eye injuries are preventable and what needs to be done by the government and businesses in this regard. Madam, I'll put this debate also in the context of rights. You started with the rights. So the basic rights being equality and life. Why is environment so important? If you are looking at it from a rights perspective, right to life is germane to humanity. It's the most fundamental of the rights. It's also the most fundamental because, not only because it cannot be taken away, but because it's irreversible. If someone's right to life is taken away, one cannot bring that back. Consequently, it takes precedence over other human rights. Over a period of time, our Supreme Court has read into right to life several other rights. It's not simple biological existence. It's existence with dignity. Consequently, right to dignity is a part of right to life. So say, gender harassment at workplace is an assault on right to dignity. Supreme Court framed the Vishaka guidelines. Consequently, the government brought out the act, and now Big businesses would need to have ICC's, Internal Complaints Committee, in place and requisite pillars for identifying a complaint and addressing that complaint. Similarly, the courts have also read into right to life the right to health. So my chairperson said in the morning, how the commission sees it is that even the right to IPR may have to yield where right to life is at stake. And environment directly impacts right to life because it endangers life, changes in life cycles of climate, weather, global warming, so on and so forth. They impact the quality of food that we take, they impact the quality of water that we have, potable water, and consequently, they also impact our right to life. So businesses have a role to play in the environment in which they are operating. My chairperson also mentioned today in the morning about Bhopal, where a big business has left behind debris, which continues to contaminate groundwater. So for businesses to be strategic, to be able to survive over a longer time space and to be able to do better, not only domestically but also internationally, they would need to also do good for them to do well, as you have said, sir. In addition, businesses also need to look at right to equality. The Constitution already allows that, but with more jurisprudence on the subject, right to equality is now being enforced for, say, women in civil rights also, but LGBTQ, gender identification. The business would need to cater to that. It would also appear more wholesome when they do businesses with other countries. I was sharing notes with some of my colleagues in other national human rights institutions of APF countries. Some of them even have legislations where they recognize the rights of LGBTQ and also say rights of disabled to have equal job opportunities. So, several countries are now looking at bringing in provisions to ensure that human rights are also in some way written into the supply chain management, which means not only big businesses, but small businesses from whom they are sourcing or who would be part of the supply chain management would need to conform to certain basic principles of human right. Recently my hometown is Agra, I went to a shoe manufacturer and was buying a shoe and I realized that there's some outside guys taking notes somewhere, so I asked them, what you doing? He said, before I export my shoes, I have to get my factory audited, a social audit. A Singapore company had been assigned a social audit of that company, and what was that company looking into? It was looking into issues like how much per square foot area is there for each worker, whether children are allowed, whether children are working there or not. For women, is there a separate queue, is there a separate toilet, separate restroom, and so on and so forth. So they were looking into that. And the buyers of those shoes would first ensure that yes, this business is conforming to such and such criteria before they place a purchase order. So in course of time, Indian businesses would also need to adapt to all that, and to do well, they would need to do good. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really glad that you re-emphasized the environment aspect of it, and that the environment is inherently connected to the right to life. And I think that's important. And I think the day is not far away when you will have international businesses asking for audits for our companies. And I think this is again where I want to re-emphasize the fact of our informal labor, and as to what are their rights and how do we protect them as we go forward. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jain, very much. By the way, just one thing that I wanted to point out before our next speaker, Ms. Tikku, came along. I just recently heard that the migration that takes place from one area to the other, where workers leave their families behind and are not able to meet their families for more than, let's say, once a year or twice a year or something like that, is a part of a violation of human rights. So that what you really come to is that, it's a very important issue, which is that the migratory model of development, where, if you look at India, it's like this, and, you're getting this migration from the south, the north and the east to the south and the west, and about 40 million people today migrate. In China, this figure is 400 million. And if you keep multiplying this, and there are these people who leave behind their families there and then come away, someday, one day, very soon, people will start questioning whether their human rights are being violated or not. And if so, it's our duty for the businesses to start thinking of creating jobs where people are, rather than bringing people over to where they create their capacities. And I think there's a very big challenge which President Kalam had actually emphasized at one point of time. I just thought I'll bring it to your notice, Ms. Teku. She's the Senior Vice President with the Aditya Birla Group, I suppose based in Mumbai, your turn.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a pleasure and honor to be here addressing this gathering. And I suppose I'm the only business here. Morning also I saw the panel. So I'm possibly the odd one out when everybody is speaking on the right side of human rights. So I thought I have some slides. Can somebody put those? Yeah. Thank you. So being in business and corporate, we can't do without slides to manage the time. Thank you. So what I would start with where we started as Aditya Birla Group. I suppose we don't need an introduction. Most of us know we are a multinational conglomerate with our presence in almost 17 different types of businesses, and more are adding. Some of the names you might be aware of. Largely we are B2B business. A few are business directly to business to customers. So in the December 2012, the chairman declared our sustainability vision, and a group level sustainability cell was formed, and I joined the group. I was an outsider to the group. So it was a cautious decision taken that within about 125,000 employees that we have, we will not choose the internal people to come into this group. We want a totally outside view and them to develop a framework or look at how do we implement this vision and make it a reality. And this was in December 2012. Can I have the next slide, please? So what happened is, as a part of this, we created an ABG, a sustainable business model. We never called it sustainability, and I was glad that someone mentioned that word in the morning panel. And also when we say doing good when, what is it?
Doing well.
Doing well while doing good. So you have to do good, but yes, we can't forget doing well for all the stakeholders. So we created an ABG Sustainable Business Framework, which is very large, has almost about 25 to 30 focus areas, about 10 focus areas under environment. So like something like resource conservation, circularity. We added climate change and adaptation right now, but then water is a separate focus area, etc. Biodiversity, waste. Safety has about 20 separate areas, right from machine guarding to working at height and visual boards and signs, etc. And then there were topics we put in as supply chain management, human rights, transportation, logistics, stakeholder engagement, land acquisition, etc. And then the third pillar where we talked about future-proofing the business. So all that we speak in the responsible business, where we had these focus areas. Middle was the stakeholder engagement, where we said existing stakeholders and engaging with the strategic stakeholders. The global policy makers, the research associations. So what is it that is going to come? Future gazing, or you can say horizon scanning, and then future proofing the business. How do we take it in our strategy development? So developing new projects, acquisitions, crisis management, etc. So that was how the framework was. I have not put a slide for it because it's very complicated, but can I have the next slide? This one shows, please keep clicking. And yeah, so this one shows which are those smaller topics we addressed under the, you can say human rights, or I don't want to say social. ESG came as a terminology much later after COVID. So here, these were the different topics that we addressed. Now, when I say addressed, what does the framework consist about? It has policies and different management and technical standards and multiple guidance notes. Today, we stand at 72 technical standards and 19 management standards, and somewhere around more than 80 guidance notes. So, cultural heritage management, indigenous peoples management, land acquisition, resettlement and rehabilitation, and external grievance management. So, these were some core pillars which were governed or are governed by the human rights policy we have. And stakeholder engagement, we kept a separate policy, which is the stakeholder engagement policy. And there are multiple guidance notes right from FPIC, free prior informed consent, how to go about it, to developing human rights management plan, conducting human rights due diligence, etc. So with this context, can we go to the next slide, please? We also embedded on this the human rights aspect in our supply chain management. So where we already have a supply chain policy and a security policy, just because many times it so happens that certain human rights violations occur in the activities that the security personnel do. So that is the reason where we had put some of the human rights requirement in security management. So this is not the IT security. This talks about people, the site or the infrastructure security, and the material or the product security. So aspects of trespassing, there can be human rights violations there. And of course, if there is any internal or external unrest, managing those. There are locations where armed security is required and used. So all those guidelines and guidance about when to use those arms, etc. So all this is part of this security management in terms of human rights that we have spoken. I'll go a little detail on supply chain a little later. Can we move to the next slide, please? So this is very well aware that we spoke since morning, and I suppose Nasrat might talk more. The entire human rights management that we have looked at is strongly aligned with the United Nations Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, which asks for three things: having a human rights policy, conducting human rights due diligence, and having a remediation process. We have added the bullet number 3, that when each site, when they conduct a human rights due diligence, some aspects will come at a business level. When I talk of business, if you say Ultratech as a business, it has 70 odd sites. So there are certain due diligence aspects the sites need to do, and at the supply chain level, both the site and the business needs to look at, because they could be common suppliers supplying material or services to various sites. So we said each site should have a human rights management plan. You have done a due diligence, you have a methodology, and whatever has come out of it, how are you going to mitigate it? Who are the people? What are your plans? Should come out as a human rights management plan. Now, from the business perspective, as earlier it was said, we also do face various customer audits, benchmarking agencies who look at us and want to rate us. Many times they just look at what is disclosed and rate us on their aspects of ESG. Of course, we feel in case of human rights, the disclosure done by the group and any of our business needs more to be done compared to environment, health, safety, that the disclosures that happen. So each site is required to create their own human rights management plan and have their remediation processes. Why I said processes? Because some remediation process always existed. With a supplier or with a contractor, with the community, but it wasn't formalized. So the framework made it mandatory for the group companies and the sites to have formal systems towards conducting all of these activities, including remediation, to strengthen those. Though there are sites which are certified, because when I talk about systems to SA 8000, etc., but there is much more to ask, because even if they are certified to SA 8000, doesn't mean the standard asks a lot of things, but doesn't mean everything gets done. So that's the challenge we always have, because customers keep asking, we need SA 8000 certification, and then the site says on top of that you are asking, please do this standard and do more detail. But this is how we are trying to put this across. Work to be done by this is to be, we felt that it has to be led by the human resource function, because it's about people, a lot of internal, and how to deal with contractor suppliers in terms of the child labor or wages and labor requirements is looked at by that function. But along with them, there are 3-4 functions which we have said is a cross-functional team only who can work towards human rights management, conducting due diligence, etc. Can we move to the next one, please? So now I will, what we have done so far, we have first started with an in-house human rights due diligence tool. The idea was to at least first put in order our house to say what is our baseline today, what is it that is existing today in terms of our own policies and processes. So here we have mapped all the UDHR related rights, and plus additionally we added the migrant workers and things like that. So around 38 rights and some potential abuses, and within the 4 stakeholders of community, suppliers, contractors, and our own employees, is a simplistic tool. Just to baseline without any great data in terms of number, but does a method exist, does a system exist, are chances of some of these occurring. So what happened is everyone talked that we have very little visibility in supply chain. The house is well in order, but we can't take guarantee what happens in the supply chain. Largely also because we never went and asked them, and they may be large companies, larger than us as suppliers, but then of course, as we have been seeing, there could be MSMEs. So we have gone ahead, and last year what we did is we made a group level supplier code of conduct. It was a humongous exercise, took us around 1 year, 8 months, simply because all business procurement heads, all business sustainability heads, they have to work together to see what are different stakeholders asking us and how do we incorporate it in our supplier code of conduct. And some businesses were doing very minimalistic, whereas some were very ahead of it. So then we thought, no, at least this is minimum ABG's level standard for a supplier to sign off in the supplier code of conduct is what we developed, which has 5 pillars. Very first one is human rights and labor, and then there is environment, occupational health, safety, governance, and community. So now you understand the community where the supplier is there. So when we talk of environment, what was spoken in the morning session is being incorporated there. So first step now we have taken is the group level supplier code of conduct, with the businesses can add more to it as they require any specifics. And of course also the guide to operationalize sustainability led supplier life cycle process. So processes and templates for collecting information and data when you want to onboard a supplier, and this I am talking from the perspective of these 5 pillars beyond the traditional requirements of what is your TIN, what is your PAN, etc., and their financials and infrastructural capability. Beyond this, these are now added. The next challenge came to us, then how do we work on this? We need a digitization or digitalized platform for it. And this year now we are working on evaluating which would be a good platform. which can help us right from onboarding the supplier, taking this information from them, to monitoring their progress, if at all they fall into what level or category based on the criteria, which are these five criteria and sub-criteria. Where can we do capacity building? If the engagement that we do, can it be there available on digital platform? Can there be training sessions or videos available to the supplier where he understands what do we mean by scope 3, what do we mean by labor related, what information data you should be maintaining. So we are trying and evaluating if there is a platform that we can do. We are still in the process, but what I came across is there are two types of platforms available. One which gives you a rating of your supplier. So they have their standard questions, they have their own methodology, and then they say, okay, this supplier, according to my rating mechanism, is at B plus and AA. Like how businesses are rated, they are rating these suppliers on some of these criteria. Whereas there are some platforms who allow that you say, tell us what all questions as per we have standard, but you can add on to it and we will not do the rating. You decide your weight and strength you want to give on these, and you can then decide which are my suppliers with whom I will do business. So it's another task that we are evaluating many platforms. We didn't come across, of course we did some from India and some are from other countries. The only challenge, if anybody has to understand, is we heard in the morning that there are a lot of regulatory changes that are coming because of climate change and human rights requirements, like the mandatory human rights due diligence, supply chain due diligence act from Germany. And when your supply chain is existing globally, then the requirements of that should come immediately on this platform. So that becomes a requirement that the supplier will understand and has to comply with, or whether it applies to them, he will have to say that, do I fall into reporting? So we are looking at that single platform which can give us this, including the climate change and geopolitical risk of the region, from both perspectives. One, to keep the supply chain going, and second also to understand where is it that we need to be doing any help or hand-holding or capacity building. So that is some work that is happening in terms of suppliers. And when I talk about here suppliers, they are raw material and goods. Of course, value chain is something we have still not touched in great detail. But textile value chain, we are going ahead only because textile and FMCG are the sectors where there are many civil societies, there are many regulations which are coming, where these questions, like the one he said, that the shoe manufacturer was audited, and he may be making for some very well-known brand, but this guy may be in a very small place. So our textile and apparel business, they go ahead with even the value chain. On the health here, we have done internally in terms of human rights, and because we talk about health as well, we have embedded requirements of climate change. We have some captive mining operations, and things like silicosis have happened in the past when the regulations were also not too tighter. So we do a qualitative exposure assessment of all workers at the workplace, and this is an international methodology, and then we do a quantitative assessment, that how much of heat stress, how much of vibration, how much of exposure to dust is the person exposed during his daily 8-hour shift. So there are sensors put on their collars, and the online monitoring is done for a few days, and then there are mathematical models through which it comes out that what is the exposure and how much dust of what category they can inhale. So this is very technical. So we have changed the health monitoring depending on the type of work the person is doing, what parameters should be monitored. somebody has to work at height. If he is into maintenance, then the parameters that the person will be monitored are changed basis the work. And also because of climate change and the heat stress, especially heat stress is felt more in certain activities. We have done the workplace changes, shift hours, how long a person will work in those areas of dust, heat and sound, vibration, etc. So these are a few changes which are happening slowly. It doesn't happen just one day. It begins with making policies and then phase-wise implementation happens. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah. So I'll just come to last two things, which is some of the challenges in terms of human rights. Supply chain visibility. Even though we are that large, we know tier 1. But the tier 2, tier 3 proves to be a challenge. We also have a lot of critical suppliers in the unorganized sector. So I'll finish in 2 minutes. So that is a challenge. Understanding, awareness and competency of the topic. Availability of data. When I say data, not who is the supplier and where, but what you have to report, that data from your supplier itself sometimes is a challenge, and the availability of tools to look at this. Communication and internal and external. So main question is asked to us by small suppliers or even medium is, you are asking me to do so many things, what am I going to get out of it? This question doesn't come largely from the textile suppliers in that value chain or even suppliers, because a lot of brands and a lot of the production happens in India and Asia. But for some of the others, these are the questions coming. So overcoming language and cultural barriers with suppliers, and also having those requirements within the tool, that we keep asking, how many languages do you have? That the supplier can then translate everything at the click of a button and see all those within that. I will just keep the external because I just spoke about international regulations and standards that are coming. Can we move to the last slide? Few solutions, of course, yes, awareness, training, but then who does is also a question. I'm not saying there could be things like a collaborative effort which is required, and when I say collaborative, need not be all the similar type of sectoral industries, but could be others such as joining hands with other organizations, industrial organizations, and at time by government bodies possibly, to bring and sensitize this human rights requirements to all types of businesses. Policy advocacy, where businesses will have to be playing a role. Many times they stay aside, they do not participate, but large organizations do, but then they need to put forward when the policies are made, what is doable, what is not doable. And we need certain sectoral specific standards or guidelines and definitions more specifically on what do we mean by each of the terminology that is used. Like you see, responsible sourcing policy, BRSR is asking, what do we mean by? We have a responsible sourcing standard made. We ourselves find it difficult to implement. So how do we ask to the supplier who is saying, do you have a responsible sourcing policy? So we need to have those standards or specific definitions to bring clarity so that it's easy for any business to go and ask, this is what the document says and this is what is expecting. A backup of that is required to make things happen. And I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to know that there is a corporate house which has a well worked out policy for human rights and is creating a framework which could serve as a template for the others and looking after the supply chains as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Ku. Our next speaker is Mr. Gaurav Vats. He is from the International Division of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Gaurav.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Thank you, RTG, the Secretary for Ministry of Labour and Employment. Certain words that we have just heard, standardization, certification, human right management, migration, sustainability, environment, social audit, right to equality, value chain, care economy, job and skills, and ultimately the economic power shift. So let me try to cover certain areas into that particular words. And Dr. Tikku, you're not the odd man out. You're on the center. We are talking about the business and human rights. So, when it comes to the business and human rights, it is widely recognized that the companies from any industry, in any country, and of any size can have positive and negative impact on human rights at any stage of their value chain. The UNGP on business and human rights adopted in 2011 established the first global standard on the respective roles of business and governments in ensuring the companies respect human rights in their own operations, value chain, business relationship. At the core of the UNGP, there are three pillars: protect, respect, and remedy framework for preventing and addressing the negative impact of business activities on people's human right. This is also initiated the discussions on the international legal binding treaty, and with regard to the business and human rights, investors and rating agencies, basically they are factoring companies' human rights performance into sustainability rating, investment decisions, and cost of capital. So while the principal responsibility for change lies with the national government, a whole of society approach is needed. The social partners participate in the social and solidarity economy, businesses, investors, survivor group, etc., etc. Technical cooperation and assistance from the UN agencies, other multilateral and bilateral organization, international and non-government organization, other groups will also be important to the progress. Social dialogue provides an essential framework for building lasting, consensus-based solution on the challenges of modern slavery. We appreciate our government for creating that legal infrastructure within our country and implementing the required legislation, both at center and state level, to regulate and ensure ease of doing business as well as ease of living. Since I'm representing FICCI and Aditya Birla Group is our founding member, so I want to talk a little bit, on what we have done at FICCI in the state, especially the Gujarat, and now working on a couple of other states, which includes Maharashtra as well. Our Gujarat state office has done significant work to protect the rights of worker under the FICCI Gujarat Social and Compact initiative. The Social Compact, aspires to ensure great dignity and equity of informal worker within industries in India, and mainstream the aspirations that responsible business is equal to successful business. I mean, in addition to what we have heard, do well by doing good. So, it's a responsible business is equal to the responsible, successful business. The Social Compact enables business to ensure 6 key outcomes for informally engaged worker in the ecosystem, and these are secure living wages, foster gender equality, ensure health and social security, maximize safety against accidents, facilitate access to entitlements, enable participation in future of work. Social Compact provides customized support to corporate, co-designed by institutes and NGOs, which basically covers, adopt solutions and integrate standards into the current business machinery, aggregate dashboard, social compact dashboard for collective company progress, ecosystem approach to enable improved supply chain worker practices, on-ground impact, covering the initiative workers facilitation center, hub and spoke in industry clusters, community of practice to the share risk, learning and ideas with industry leaders and experts. So under this initiative, we adopted a couple of other parameters which covers the labor practices. Under the labor practices, we focus on equal opportunity employers, prevention of involuntary labor, child labor, contract employment, human treatment, and disciplinary practice. Under the standard of wages and work, we cover wages and remuneration, communication of wages. Wages shall be paid directly to the bank account. This is what we have, emphasizing for the informal sector. Payment schedule, The working period consists of 8-hour shift and overtime to be compensated at twice the ordinary wages. This is what we are saying. Under the occupational health and safety measure management, we emphasizing on safety at the workplace to provide the safe work environment that minimize all work hazards resulting in accident, disease, permanent disability, or death, providing provisional protective equipments, maintain an adequate supply of the first aid boxes, a workplace environment to provide safe workplace environment for all employees and, workers' health. We are equally, emphasizing on the women in workplace to provide equal opportunity to all, respect each other's integrity and dignity, their privacy, their right to equality and right to opportunity in the workplace, must maintain minimum standard of welfare for women in the workplace. On the maternity policies to ensure the pregnant women workers and mothers, as per the provisions laid down by the respective legislation, should be followed. We are even covering the sexual harassment. Equality in the employment can be seriously impaired, when the individual are subjected to discrimination by way of sexual harassment at the workplace. So each such incidents, result not only in the violation of the fundamental right of the gender equality and the right of the life and liberty under Article 14, 15 and 21 of the Constitution of India, but also in the violation of the victim's fundamental right under Article 19. 1G. So, it is our endeavor to invite like-minded employers, NGOs, and civil society to come together for this socio-compact initiative in all the other states. And finally, at the national level, we have already taken up a project in 2 other states, besides Gujarat, which is Kerala and Rajasthan. And we are covering Maharashtra as well, to form similar coalitions and protect the labor rights as well as the human rights of all informal, migrants, underprivileged and marginalized worker. So, lastly, I would like to mention 2 more points. It's a human right is an integral element of SDGs, as there can be no sustainable development in which people are deprived of their fundamental rights and freedoms, and businesses has a key role to play, consisting of its responsibility to respect human rights as outlined in the UN, UNGP's rules, and of the opportunity of transform people's life for better and make a key contribution towards achieving the sustainable goals. As economic growth and increased national and international businesses activities cannot be made at the expense of social and human development, corporate sector respect for human rights become of pivotal importance, especially in the Indian context. So I would like to end my inputs over here. Over to you, Dr. Kumar.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Mr. Vats. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is Ms. Nusrat Khan. She's from the United Nations Development Program based in Delhi. Ms. Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar, and good evening, everybody. And I think the only downside of being the last speaker is I hope there hasn't been information overload. I think speakers have raised some profound points and actually made reference to a lot of what I will also speak about today. I represent the United Nations Development Program. Just to introduce the agency, we operate in about 170 countries globally, and our main mandate is to work with governments, to support governments on eradication of poverty, reduction of inequalities, a strengthening of systems, governance systems, health systems, but also most importantly, sitting at the very heart of our work is the achievement of the 2030 Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. So most of our programmatic interventions in one way or the other are aimed to contribute to that larger aim. Thank you for putting up the slides. Next slide, please. Just to introduce the business and human rights programming at UNDP, if you can just move to the next slide, just to give you an overview of where we operate on programming specifically related to business and human rights. We are currently active in about 35 countries across all continents, and we are expanding on a daily basis. I know there is colleagues working globally to expand in Latin America, America, Central Asia, Arab states, and also the larger Asia-Pacific region where we already operate in the region. I mean, of course, India is a programming country, but so is Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Nepal, and the entire neighborhood. Next slide, please. The overall objective of the program is to promote sustainable development, sustainable economic development across the globe, and we do so, we premise all our work on the 3 pillars of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Speakers have already referred to it, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in detail in the slides, in the coming slides, but we emphasize all our work on the protect, respect, and remedy framework of the UN Guiding Principles. We, of course, provide technical support and advisory support to governments on developing what are called as the National Action Plans on Business and Human Rights, being the central policy, a vision document for a country on what its business and human rights ambitions must look like. We also engage in a lot of dialogue and trainings, and we conduct most of our dialogues and trainings on the UN Guiding Principles framework. We do this in a multi-stakeholder settings. We do this with businesses, with civil society organizations, also with national human rights institutions and business associations. In sort of aiding our dialogue with businesses and business associations, we've developed quite comprehensive tools, training guides, facilitation guides to sort of really unpack what it means to express their commitment and word on business and human rights. We also work with civil society organizations quite actively. We do so through grants, and the focus of our work there is to raise awareness on the subject and also to strengthen the 3rd pillar of the UN Guiding Principle, which is access to remedy. And that is also an area where we actively engage with national human rights institutions globally on. And finally, to create a certain amount of public dialogue on the subject, we have a lot of public outreach. We sort of build this dialogue through research that we conduct on the subject. In India, for example, we've conducted research on the environmental laws and how those have an impact on the way businesses operate in the country. We've also we've had research on how the use of artificial intelligence technology by the private sector across different sectors like retail, gig, financial, healthcare has actually an impact on human rights. The attempt is to create a body of work out there, a narrative to sort of make a dialogue on business and human rights in a multi-stakeholder setting with the government, with civil society, national human rights institutions, and very importantly, the businesses themselves. Next slide, please. Next slide again. Just to sort of refer to why do we actually talk about business human rights? This is a subject which has sort of gained a lot of traction in the last decade and a half. There's been globally a lot of public concern over human rights abuses across global supply chains, something that Ms. Ahuja was also talking about. There's a lot of scrutiny on how businesses now operate across supply chains, across value chains, which essentially means in the case of a garment, where is the cotton sourced from to who is buying the impact on the consumer. So there's been a lot of conversation around that. Of course, governments have been very, very mindful of the impact that businesses have on the rights of their citizens and on people generally. Consumer protection groups have become very active on this subject, and of course, journalists are also doing their job in reporting on this subject quite extensively. Next slide, please. We now also have a host of new laws, something that Ms. Teku spoke about, that what we are witnessing is across countries, whether it's Germany, European Union as a bloc, the United States of America, France, UK, Australia, everybody is coming up with laws on what it means to conduct business responsibility. In Germany, for example, it's called the German Supply Chain Law. law, which basically means that a company headquartered in Germany, if it has operations across the globe, and for assuming if it had operations in India, it must be responsible for the way the production of its goods have an impact on the human rights and environmental rights of employees and communities in India as well. Of course, a very important growing force and creating a business case on the subject are institutional investors. Investors increasingly only want to put their money in businesses that are socially responsible, environmentally responsible, and are averse to risks. An investor, of course, does not want their money to be stuck in businesses which is ridden with litigation and and does not have a social license to operate overall. Next slide, please. I think this is a fairly comprehensive, what I'm trying to convey here. Businesses are definitely a force of good, a force of economic good. They provide us with millions of jobs. They provide us with development, with infrastructure. So there is no two ways about businesses not being a force of good. But I think while they do that, there is also in the operation of any economic activity, there is sometimes negative adverse impacts can also happen. For example, there can be unsafe working conditions in factories, again something that speakers have spoken about. There can be displacement of communities due to land acquisition projects. There can be pollution, both air and water, both resources can be polluted. And finally, there can be instances of forced labor or child labor. So within this context, I think way back in 2011, and next slide please. Yes. In 2011, a document called the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights was globally endorsed. This was a document which was spearheaded by a gentleman called Professor John Ruggie, and it sort of distinctly recognized both the responsibility of the state as well as the businesses towards human rights, and in meeting the international human rights obligations. The roles for both the state and the businesses have been clearly defined in this document. Next slide, please. The document sort of covers all human rights, and again, speakers have spoken about most of these already. The ILO conventions, but also the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which we are celebrating the 75th year of its passing this year. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. But I think most importantly, speakers have constantly referred to the Constitution of India, right to life, personal liberty. I think that itself is the most comprehensive human rights document for us in India. Next slide, please. The reason this was such a milestone document was because it was adopted through a global consensus. There was, like I said, absolute clarity of the roles and responsibility of both the state and businesses. There was a very strong business case for businesses because of the well-being of the customers, the interest of the investors, the reputational, operational, and litigation risks that a business may face if it's not mindful of its impact, and of course, the strong connection to the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. We all know that more than 90% of the 169 targets in the Sustainable Development Goals are based on human rights. So to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we must sort of fulfill our commitment to human rights, and both states and businesses have a very strong role to play, and it would be virtually impossible to achieve the 2030 agenda without their contributions. Next slide, please. The basic fundamental principles of the UN Guiding Principles, of course, to do no harm is as a base minimum. Businesses are required not to do any harm to the community, to their employees, and to their stakeholder base as a large. The UN Guiding Principles applies to all companies, irrespective of size, sector, shape, everything. It applies to all internationally recognized human rights, like I spoke about. And it's not only limited to the business itself, but its entire supply base. The next slide, please. Structurally, like I said, there are 31 principles, 3 pillars. The first one is the state duty to protect. The business obligation to respect is the pillar number 2. And pillar 3, and a very important one, it relates to access to remedy. And there is a clear obligation on states and businesses to provide remediation frameworks. Next slide, please. Now, I'll just quickly sort of review each pillar. The first pillar, which speaks to the state responsibility, state duty to protect. This is where all our laws come into play. Our labor laws, our environmental laws, the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, the National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct. This is a state domain. The state must list out what it means to conduct business responsibly. The second one, yes, just 3 minutes. 3 to 4 minutes. The second one is businesses. The businesses have a responsibility to respect human rights. This is, again, Ms. Rico has spoken about the obligations to conduct human rights due diligence, but also have a human rights policy statement. So there is the set of actions which businesses can undertake to fulfill their responsibility to respect. And finally, access to remedy, which is, should there be any violations of human rights, both the state and businesses must provide remediation channels. A state channel could look like a court of law, a mediation, or even NHRC's own complaint mechanism system. And non-judicial remedies are consumer helplines and other helplines that businesses often create. The next slide, please. We can skip 2 slides now. Finally, just to articulate the business case, why must business invest in this area? For long-term value creation, you do not want to be a business which is ridden by reputational risks, by litigation risk. Also, what is not good for the people and the planet can never be good for businesses in the longer term. So I think there's a very clear business case for business and human rights. The next slide, please. Regulatory drivers, I won't go into too much detail, but again, a lot has been spoken already. There are laws coming up globally to address this issue. States are now requiring, and Sir had mentioned about how Singapore wants to know exactly how that shoe has been made, and the citizens there want to know, has there been child labor use? Of course, our own Securities Exchange Board of India, SEBI, now has BRSR, which is the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting Framework, which requires businesses to report on their environmental impact, human rights impact, and governance frameworks. Next slide, please. Non-regulatory drivers are, again, civil society and campaigns, media coverage, consumer campaigns, and geopolitics. The G7 had a specific comment on business and human rights and how they would like to see all member nations promote business and human rights globally. And the final slide, I think, next slide, please. This is actually from a McKinsey company report and how sustainability reporting has evolved over the years. And in the next slide after this, you will notice that meeting investors' expectations, again aligned to business and human rights, is now increasingly a factor for sustainability reporting. So I think that sort of concludes the bottom line, that there is an increasing demand to be accountable for actions adverse on the society and on rights, and that is something which requires investment both from the state and from the business side. Just the next slide, which is just the last one, absolutely last one, sir. We have the National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct in India, which already sort of lay out what it means to conduct business responsibility. This is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has come up with this in 2019, and this is currently the most primary document as far as responsible business conduct is concerned in India. I'll leave it at that and be open to any questions that there are there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that we come to the end of the panel presentations. Questions, please, or comments from the floor. Yes, please. Gentlemen here. If you will introduce yourself and then hopefully a question, but also a comment. It's not working?
Yeah. Am I audible now? Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Professor Indrajit Dubey, Vice Chancellor, National Law University, Meghalaya. I mean, it's a wonderful presentation from all the, panel member. And I was working with Professor John Reggie when he was preparing this, the 3-pillar which we have suggested. And in the multi, stakeholder consultation which you hold a number of times, there could not have any consensus that should it be a hard law or should it be a guideline or should it be a private ordering. So ultimately it has come as a guideline and to be followed and adopted by everybody. And today in the panel there was a discussion that we can also bring the private ordering, like Madam was talking from Aditya Birla Group in the supply chain. Private ordering, I mean that, the companies are framing the policies within themselves and that has to be followed by all the, the supply chain and everybody. And at the same time, we have another provision in 166 of the Companies Act, wherein there is a positive duty has been assigned to the director. Now, in this particular context, what is your thought process in the panel that should we bring some kind of a parity into this compliance process and which might not happen through the private ordering or the policy inside that particular company, because then according to the market everybody will try to leverage their policy and there cannot be uniformity adopted. So can we insert some positive duty in 166 of the Companies Act, like positive duty towards the environment, positive duty towards the business for the human rights, and will it bring the solution to percolate down? Thank you so much for giving the opportunity.
Would you want Ms. Tiku to answer that question?
I think Madam Khan can give the answer, or
yeah, but let's take a couple more and then we can come back. Yeah, gentleman there. Yeah, thank you.
Sir Shah Amir, Core Group Member, National Human Rights Commission. I rather need a clarification from Madam Tiku. Why is it, see, when we talk of business and human rights, and I'll correct the thread from the supply chain. Supposing a company gives order to some section of the people or so, to a group of people, where is the disconnect that those people, those groups always remain poor and the companies go on carrying more and more assets? If we see those groups who are the real manufacturers, they remain same after decades. Their families, their generations remain same. Their grandfather was on the same site. They are also on the same site. And companies have acquired more and more. I'm not against companies, but where is the disconnect? I want to clear that.
I am Professor D.P. Varma from Law Commission of India. Two things I have to say. One, with regard to United Nations guiding principle. I just want to know how far this guiding principle is legally binding over the states. Because in international law, there are many declaration guiding principles which are not legally binding. And if we are going through with these guiding principles, perhaps the realization of business and human rights may take a longer time. Just for example, I must say, several years back, some instruments were passed in the United Nations with regard to code of conduct for transnational corporations, but they were not binding. This is one thing. The second thing, which, sir, you have mentioned about the migrant laborers. About this, I must say, there are migration of labor from within the country from one part to the another part, but there is also migration of labor from one country to another country. On this point, there is international convention on the rights of all migrant workers and of their families, which relate to these issues. In India or in many countries, the problem of migrant workers from other country is that either they do not have any license, they do not have any permission, they are illegal migrants, and the government has difficulty how we should legalize them. And they are unauthorized, either we should say they should go back to their country. Then the certain principles of international law are involved. These are some of the things which I just wished.
Any last question? Yes, please.
I am Satish Kumar Mathur, DG Human Rights, Uttar Pradesh. This is for, I would, after these deliberations, I would request NHRC to frame certain a guideline or maybe some advisory or certain things which can be mandatory in the coming legislations or for the government. There are certain points which I am enumerating. Number one, every industry, new industry which would be coming or existing, they may give a declaration, they are human rights management compliant. This should be made mandatory to all industries. Secondly, all the employees working there, they should have an app which for their contribution, whatever they can see online. This should be made mandatory. Third, there should be internal grievance management systems which should include the stakeholders, means the labor and the other parts, other stakeholders, mandatorily. That they should be made compulsory. Fourth, on every product, like all other products, we write this is, it should be written that product is human right compliant. This can be written on the product, that this product is human rights compliant in the industry, that particular industry. Then next is, if there is something amiss, this degradation of environment or violation of human rights, onus should be fixed on the board of the members of or directors in the industry. This should be made mandatory. And there should be something, huge compensations awarding to the labor in general when there is degradation of environment or violation of human rights. Like in other countries, we have law of torts. Similarly, there should be some kind of law which should fix huge amount of cost on the industry so that one should be example for all other industries. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we'll start from Gaurav. You want to say something in response? Not compulsory.
No, not
yeah. Steku?
I was asked this, where is the disconnect from small companies to large companies are growing, and where are they, why the small companies are still there? I don't know if I'm the right person to answer this. We see large companies are growing, but they have, with time, they have changed some of their models. They have changed into either discontinuing certain of, I can talk about the big one that I am representing, that they have either changed from discontinuing some products or some line of their business and moved on. Someone would say it's easy for a large company because they can absorb the losses that incur. With the smaller companies, what is happening now is, one is possibly they are not able to do that. And over time, if you see with the digitization that is happening, the more requirements that for products that even customers are asking for, one needs to quickly adapt to that and keep pace with those requirements to survive. That's what I would say, but I don't know if that's the right answer for your question, but that's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to say that?
Yes. Yes, so there is a, just to answer, confirm there is a fiduciary duty of the director, not only to the shareholders of the company, and this is under the Companies Act of India, but also to the stakeholders. And that sort of imbibes and sort of covers the entire essence of what we're trying to talk about, that you are responsible, your company's actions or any adverse actions are responsible. The responsibility lies with that director or for any adverse human rights impact or environmental impacts for that matter. And so just to try and respond to your question on the UN guiding principles, you're correct, are not legally binding, they are guiding principles. But I think the essence of the human rights that they try to cover, those are all binding instruments. I mean, we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the ICCPR, the ISER. I think the essence is in those conventions, and those are binding instruments. And I think just actually acknowledging the fact that these may not be as binding as necessary. We actually have a legally binding treaty on business and human rights currently being negotiated in Geneva. So we hopefully we will have a binding treaty on business and human rights, which will be binding. Yes. So there will not be any question of it being a flexible soft international law. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. On the International Convention on Migration, migrant that you protect rights, I wonder if we need similar convention for internal migration, that those who migrate from one part of the country to the other, somehow their rights would need to be protected as well. So that's, and on your questions or on your suggestions, the Prime Minister on the August 15th address talked about 67,000 regulatory compliances today on the businesses in India. And you want to add more. But the point therefore is that it's really better to take people along and to create the environment and to seek the cooperation of the businesses rather than sort of just institute laws which make compliance even harder and more difficult. So it's really a two-way process, which I would suggest that we need to get into, rather than make everything mandatory, because that will become more difficult. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. First and foremost, a big round of applause for our panelists who have done a great job. Thank you. And then to all of you for being here and bearing with us. I now request Shri Bharat Lal Ji, the Secretary General, to make his closing remarks.
Thank you, sir. Friends, now we have come to close of this session, and in that commission we came to a kind of decision that there is a need for some kind of interaction, some kind of dialogue, and developing understanding on these three issues together: business, human rights, and climate. All three are heavily interdependent. A lot of things are at stake. If we want to progress, we want to become very responsible business, very responsive business to people's requirement. It means normal service condition, basic facilities, basic amenities. Those have to be provided. So it means human rights, do carry, very significant, importance insofar as the business are concerned. I need not to mention again and again, but as we have seen, that climate is basically impacting the whole operations. The kind of disruption it is basically bringing to economy, lives, livelihood, I think we can't be ignored, and our businesses have to be climate resilient, So, National Human Rights Commission thought it, fit that let's start the dialogue. Collective wisdom should come, and we should move forward. There is no point that National Human Rights Commission on its own consider and issues advisory or certain orders. The better way forward is that we should come together, discuss, and develop a strategy. The purpose of this seminar is very limited to this aspect, that start a dialogue, develop some understanding that what need to be done, so that as a nation we are able to progress, as a business we are able to do better business, we are able to, and improve the quality of life of people. And I'm sure that today's interest and your questions as well as involvement shows that yes, I think people have started thinking about this thing, and we can come together and work on certain aspects. On behalf of National Human Rights Commission, I thank former Vice Chairman Niti Aayog and a great economist, an accomplished person. There can't be a better person than him, actually. Has worked with industry, has seen the business, has seen the environment. As a Niti Aayog Vice Chairman, he has seen every aspect of policy making. So, sir, thank you very much for sparing time and coming to this session and sharing. I'm very grateful to my other panelists, and similarly in the forenoon, Professor Vijay Raghavan, in fact, he was heavily preoccupied with some DRDO meetings and all those things, but even then he said, I'll come for 2 hours, and we are very grateful to him. And Secretary Labor and Employment, then Ms. Gauri Kumar, and from MOEF also, basically Secretary could not make because she had already one commitment. She said, I'm just sending my Joint Secretary. So I think everybody is working together, from UNDP and from private business industry, everybody is coming together. So friends, I thank everyone, and let me also put it on record that this whole thing has been conceptualized, taken forward by one of my very colleague, Joint Secretary, Mr. Devendra Kumar Nim, and a round of applause. I think he deserves for this thing. He and his team did wonderful job. Some young professionals, his team, they did wonderful job. And I was amazed, that at very short notice in 2 weeks, and they worked out everything. So thank you, Devendra, and your team, I think, for wonderful work. I think I'll request you that vote of thanks. I think that is the befitting, Thank you all very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, sir. It has been possible only as per your guidance we are working, because it was not possible to have attendance of Sri Rajiv Kumar and Professor Raghavan unless you spoke to them and requested that on the short notice they attend this seminar. I have, apart from welcoming you, I have another pious task of thanking all of you. First and foremost, I would like to thank Honorable Chairperson and Honorable members of the National Human Rights Commission for their continuous guidance and support. I would like to extend my sincere thanks and gratitude to Sri Rajiv Kumar ji, former Vice Chairman, Niti Aayog, for attending this seminar and chair and moderate the technical session number 2. I am grateful and thankful to our respected Secretary General to continuously supporting, continuously guiding how to conduct all these international seminars, conferences, etc. Under his guidance, within 1.5 months, we have conducted 2 big seminars, one on 26 July and another today. So thank you very much, sir, for your support and guidance. I would like to extend my thanks to lead speaker of both the sessions. Sir has already thanked Madam Aarti Ahuja, Secretary Labor and Employment, and Madam Gauri Kumar, former Secretary Coordination, Cabinet Secretary, for sharing their knowledge and experience on business and human rights. Thanks to all speakers of current session and forenoon session, Madam Vidya Tikku from Aditya Birla Group, and Mr. Gauravas from FICCI, Madam Nusrat Khan from UNDP, Mrs. Tulika Bansal from Danish Institute of Human Rights, Mr. Namita Agarwal from World Benchmarking Alliance. Our sincere gratitude and thanks to chairpersons, members and officers of State Human Rights Commissions who have attended seminar today. Gratitude and thanks to officers from various government departments, PSUs, autonomous organizations, statutory bodies for attending this seminar and contributing in protection and promotion of human rights. Because your presence itself speaks a lot that you are committed in protection of human rights and promoting human rights. Thanks to officers and staff of NHRC for putting their best efforts to make this seminar possible and successful in very short time. A very special thanks to media for being present here and covering the event. Thanks to CPWD, Vigyan Bhavan staff and ITDC for providing and making wonderful arrangement for this seminar. If I have left some names of some organization or individual, kindly forgive me, because you are the unsung heroes. It means if I am not taking your names, it means that you, without taking credit, you are contributing in the big task. Thank you very much, and I hope and I expect that very soon, maybe within 3-4 months again, we will try to conduct one more seminar on business and human rights. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and all the panelists for such an enlightening session, and thank you all the participants for an interactive session. May I now request Mr. Bharat Lal, Secretary General NHRC, to felicitate the Chair and the panelists by presenting a memento. Mr. Rajiv Kumar, former Vice Chairperson, Niti Aayog. Ms. Vidya Tiku, Senior Vice President, Aditya Birla Group. Mr. Gaurav Vats, and Ms. Nusrat Khan. Once again, thank you all for joining us at the Business and Human Rights Seminar. Let us leave from here with a renewed commitment to shaping a world where business and human rights go hand in hand. Safe travels and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Please join us for tea outside. Thank you.